Good morning to our guests and our esteemed members of the panel. Before we start this meeting, we would like to just test videos and sounds of our panelists. Our Executive Secretary, if you could kindly put on your video and test your mic. Please make sure that you are on the English channel and have clicked on mute original audio. Thank you.
Good morning, bonjour à tous. I can hear everybody clearly. I'm on the channel as requested and muted the original. Looking forward to the program.
Thank you, Executive Secretary. We hear you well and we see you well. Thank you very much. We'd like to just check if there is anyone else who would like to test their sound and video. Our Commissioner of SARS, perhaps.
Bonjour tout le monde. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Bonjour tout le monde. Hein? Je suis Philippe Chaudier. Mon micro marche. Juste pour tester le micro. Hein? Est-ce que ça marche?
Oui, Monsieur le Président. We can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you so much. Logan. Yes.
Good morning, Chair and Executive Secretary. Nice to join you. I hope you can all hear me and see me clearly.
Where are you?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. It's good of you to join us.
I'm just transferring to between two venues. I will be seated in the next 7 minutes, but I am online.
Good.
Thank you. It's very good to have you join us today. We look forward for you to get to the office and join us, where you are seated more stably because you are shifting around in that car there. Thank you.
Yeah, but it's the wonders of connectivity, Logan.
It's great, isn't it?
See you now.
Okay.
Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Juste vous rappeler que nous allons commencer dans environ 2 minutes. Juste le temps de donner à nos panélistes et aux intervenants de la séance d'ouverture de s'installer confortablement. Dans 2 minutes, nous commençons. Merci. les délégués francophones, est-ce que vous m'entendez correctement?
Oui, alors, Monsieur Roméo, on vous reçoit, on vous entend.
Très bien,
Très
merci.
Bien. Merci beaucoup.
Mesdames et messieurs, une fois de plus, bonjour et bienvenue à ce webinaire de lancement du réseau des femmes du secteur de la fiscalité de l'ATAF. Avant d'entamer notre programme du jour, permettez-moi de faire quelques petites annonces d'ordre logistique afin de nous assurer du bon déroulement de cet événement. Vous avez dû constater, pour ceux qui ne sont pas membres de panel, que vous n'avez pas accès à vos micros et à votre vidéo, votre caméra. En fait, nous avons actuellement un peu plus de 950 participants inscrits à ce webinaire. Et je crois que nous savons tous que des rassemblements virtuels de cette envergure sont généralement enclins à des perturbations dues à des micros et des caméras ouverts par inadvertance, ici et là. Donc, pour éviter cela, nous n'avons accordé la libre utilisation des micros et des caméras qu'aux panélistes et intervenants. Donc, mais que cela ne vous empêche pas de participer pleinement à la réunion. En fait, bien au contraire, nous vous encourageons vivement à poser des questions et à commenter en faisant usage de la section questions-réponses qui est dans le menu au bas de votre écran. Pour ce qui est des membres des panels qui m'écoutent et les présidents des sessions et autres intervenants, je vous prie de bien vouloir allumer vos caméras et bien entendu vous assurer que votre micro est ouvert lorsque vous intervenez afin de permettre à l'audience de mieux vous suivre. Et pour clore cette rubrique annonce, un dernier appel que nous avons des services d'interprétation simultanée disponibles en français, anglais et portugais. Pour suivre les débats dans la langue de votre choix, assurez-vous bien de cliquer sur l'option interprétation en bas à droite de votre écran et sélectionnez préféré et couper l'audio original avant de cliquer terminer. Et là, vous serez prêt pour la réunion. Pour la séance d'ouverture de notre programme, nous sommes honorés par une forte représentation du Conseil de l'ATAF. Plus précisément, nous avons environ le tiers du Conseil, à savoir le président, M. Philippe Chaudier, bienvenue, Monsieur le Président, le secrétaire exécutif et membre du Conseil, M. Logan Wirth, et la présidente du conseil d'administration de l'autorité fiscale du Mozambique, qui est aussi membre du conseil de l'ATAF. Il s'agit du docteur Amelia Mwendani. Madame et messieurs, soyez les bienvenus et merci de nous honorer de votre présence à ce webinaire. Avant de passer la parole au secrétaire exécutif pour son mot de bienvenue, permettez-moi aussi de reconnaître la présence parmi nous d'autres membres du conseil de l'ATAF. Vous avez vu tout à l'heure le commissaire de l'administration fiscale d'Afrique du Sud, qui est également vice-président du conseil de l'ATAF, M. Edouard Kieswetter. Bienvenue, Monsieur le vice-président. Nous avons aussi parmi nous des anciens membres du conseil et autres commissaires généraux et directeurs généraux d'administration fiscale africaine. Vous soyez tous les bienvenus. C'est un honneur et un plaisir de vous avoir parmi nous. Alors, sans plus tarder, vu que nous avons déjà dépassé notre temps de 11 minutes, nous allons maintenant inviter Monsieur le secrétaire exécutif de l'ATAF, Monsieur Logan Wirth, à prononcer son discours d'ouverture. Avant de vous inviter, M. Ward, juste pour préciser que, puisqu'il s'agit de discuter ici du rôle des femmes dans l'administration fiscale ou dans la fiscalité en Afrique, je vous ferai savoir, mesdames et messieurs, qu'au secrétariat de l'ATAF, M. Ward a déjà insufflé des initiatives qui visent justement à autonomiser les femmes dans les rôles de leadership au sein des administrations. À l'heure actuelle, nous avons au sein du conseil exécutif du secrétariat de l'ATAF 3 femmes qui sont représentées contre 2 hommes. Donc, nous sommes déjà en plein dans ce programme-là. Pour son discours d'ouverture, j'aimerais maintenant appeler M. Ward, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we expect so many people to join. This event has drawn attention from quite wide, and we are very happy about it. So, Monsieur Philippe Chodi, le président de l'ATAF, Commissioner General, Office Togolese de Recette, Mr. Edward Kiswitter, the Vice Chair of ATAF and the Commissioner of South African Revenue Service, Dr. Amelia Mwendani, Presidente Autoridad Tributaria de Mozambique, Commissioners General, Directors General of Tax Administrations, members of the ATAF Council, also members of Ministries of Finance, our development partners, multilateral organizations, tax experts, academia, government officials. These are all the people joining us today. Distinguished guests, it is really an honor to greet all of you on this very special day. It is also special for me because we are also joined by 4 of the women who set out to establish this organization just over 10 years ago. And I want to pay tribute in my greeting this morning. I don't know if all of them are on yet, but for the record, I'd like to pay tribute to Mrs. Ellen Kajina, the former Commissioner General of the Uganda Revenue Authority. Good morning, I see her there. I'd like to pay tribute to you, Ellen. I'd like to pay tribute to Mrs. Ifweko Omigui Okauru, who was the president, the chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service of Nigeria. And there you see her. I'd like to pay tribute to Mrs. Alfreda Tamba, who was at the time of ATAF's founding Deputy Minister responsible for tax and later the Commissioner General for the Liberia Revenue Authority. And Mrs. Mary Baini, who was the Commissioner General for the Rwanda Revenue Authority. And these formidable women were some of the powerhouses behind the establishment of ATAF since our meeting in 2008 and its launch in 2009, and has laid the foundation for this powerful structure that we have, and that as a secretariat we were able to serve under. Some of them have moved on to greater things. Mrs. Baini works at the revenue, works at ATAF today. She's one of our senior directors. Mrs. Tamba is finishing a term as an expert on the UN Tax Committee. Mrs. Kajina runs the road agency in Uganda. And Mrs. Ifweko Okauru is running a very successful economic, finance, and tax-related consultancy in Nigeria. And so these are the people, all of you, I greet. I say good day, bonjour, bon dia. Gender and gender equality is not only fundamental, is not only a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for peaceful, prosperous, and a sustainable world. Gender equality and women empowerment are long neglected matters. And It's been neglected on the continent and globally. And so the movement towards gender mainstreaming and equality and equal rights have become stronger over time. The quest to end all forms of discrimination against women and girls everywhere and ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision-making in political and economic and public life must become part of our national marching orders as we build sustainable, transparent, and effective institutions on the African continent. Women in Africa and elsewhere had and continue to make a valuable contribution to the nation's development trajectories. But often their efforts remain obscured owing to entrenched gender and other prejudices present in our societies across the continent. The current COVID-19 pandemic has hastened the need for our respective societies to become more gender inclusive and harness the nation's collective human resources to face the challenges of the post-COVID-19 world. Our women have already shown their mettle during these trying times, and they must be part of our plans to build a better future for the generations to follow. The ATAF 2019 publication, The African Tax Outlook, reflects that the 34 tax administration on the continent who participates in this great tax statistics publication, women only occupies 24% of executive positions in African tax authorities. A correction of this gender imbalance will introduce new perspectives to revenue collection and tax compliance. And may I add that in the 10 years, just over 10 years of serving at ATAF, the women mentioned at my introduction and those over time that have led revenue authorities in countries such as Zimbabwe, and even after Mrs. Kajina left, Doris Akol took over. The women who led revenue administration led them with absolute success. And I can attest to that, both in terms of revenue, but also in terms of innovation, modernization, and the impact of transparency and efficiency. The importance of gender equality and taxation taken individually has been widely acknowledged. However, they are rarely discussed together. In order to promote sustainable economic growth and poverty reduction, development efforts must ensure that policy interventions in the area of taxation do not negatively affect the desired outcomes in the area of gender equality. Revenue collection is the basis for that better future, and the revenue administration needs to use all our means necessary to improve collection and reduce avoidance and evasive practices. In fact, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is important that we consider the impact of tax policy on women on the continent. What, in fact, is the impact on taxation in the healthcare sector? Because we know that women are the leaders or the main users through their caring and caregiving of their own families and the communities around them. What is the impact of taxation in the informal sector and small and medium enterprises? Because women on the continent are the leading participants in these sectors. What is the impact of VAT? What is the impact of VAT on essential goods and services? Because a disproportionate impact of these tax elements, we can clearly see impacts women more than the rest of society. And so part of what this forum that we are establishing, this unit, this organization we're establishing must do is to consider research and publish the impact. So there's a leadership and management and the development of young women, etc. issue within tax, whether it's in business, administration, in policy making on the one hand, and on the other hand, there's the impact of these policies and administrative issues on women within the society, and whether there's a disproportionate impact. It must be considered. So the Women in Tax Network aim to represent and connect women across the continent to work around taxation. And this event launched today will elaborate on that, and we will talk more about this later in the program. Let me end by thanking all of you for taking the time to attend. Let me also end with a quote from Dr. Ngozi Nkonjo-Iweala, who we all know now is the first African head of the World Trade Organization. And let me end with a quote from her for you to think about. And I quote, "Investing in women is smart economics, and investing in girls, catching them upstream, is even smarter economics," end quote. Thank you very much, and I hope that we all will have very good discussions today. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le secrétaire exécutif, pour ces mots d'introduction qui font bien de souligner le rôle qu'ont joué les femmes dans la création et le développement de l'ATAF en tant qu'organisation fiscale continentale. Mais vous avez bien fait aussi de souligner le rôle qu'elles jouent, que les femmes jouent et continuent de jouer d'ailleurs dans l'amélioration des régimes fiscaux nationaux et à l'échelle continentale. Merci beaucoup pour cela. Sans plus tarder, je voudrais maintenant inviter le président de l'ATAF, M. Philippe Chaudier, à prononcer son discours d'ouverture. Monsieur le Président, quand vous êtes prêt. Merci.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Investir dans les femmes, c'est de l'économie intelligente. Et investir dans les filles, c'est de l'économie plus intelligente. Merci, monsieur, mon ami Logan Ward, pour cette belle citation que chacun prendra pour aller à la maison. Bonjour, bonsoir, bon midi, bon après-midi, selon l'endroit où vous vous retrouvez en ce moment. Je voulais simplement dire à monsieur Edouard Christouet, vice-président de l'ATAF, monsieur Logan Wolf, secrétaire exécutif de l'ATAF, madame Amélia Moutan, présidente de l'administration fiscale de Mozambique, mesdames, messieurs les commissaires, directeurs généraux des administrations fiscales, membres de l'ATAF, mesdames, messieurs les représentants des ministres en charge des finances des pays membres de l'ATAF, mesdames, messieurs les représentants des partenaires en développement et organisations multilatérales, mesdames, messieurs les fiscalistes universitaires et autres parties prenantes du secteur de la fiscalité, mesdames, messieurs du personnel du secrétariat de l'ATAF, mesdames, messieurs les internautes à travers le continent et ailleurs, distingués invités, mesdames et messieurs. Le 8 mars dernier, le monde entier a célébré la Journée internationale des droits de la femme placée sous le thème « Le leadership féminin pour un futur égalitaire dans le monde de la COVID-19 ». Quelques jours seulement après cette célébration, nous voici en train de lancer au sein de l'ATAF le réseau des femmes du secteur de la fiscalité. Permettez-moi de vous souhaiter la très cordiale bienvenue à toutes et à tous à ce webinaire de lancement du réseau des femmes du secteur de la fiscalité de l'ATAF. Le thème du rôle des femmes dans le secteur de la fiscalité ne pouvait être mieux choisi, connaissant les efforts et les sacrifices qu'ont dû consentir les femmes à travers le monde pour répondre aux défis posés par la pandémie de COVID-19, notamment ceux liés à l'écart de développement grandissant entre les hommes et les femmes dans nos sociétés. Le mouvement en faveur de l'égalité entre l'homme et la femme ne date certainement pas d'hier. En effet, depuis le début des années 1970, il y a une prise de conscience mondiale de la nécessité d'établir des sociétés plus égalitaires du point de vue du genre, avec notamment la mise en exergue de cette vision dans l'objectif 17 de l'agenda 2063 de l'Union africaine en mai 2013 et l'adoption en 2015 de la plateforme d'action des objectifs de développement durable des Nations Unies à Beijing. Ce plan ambitieux des nations africaines prône, dans son aspiration numéro 6, une Afrique dont le développement est axé sur les populations, qui s'appuie sur le potentiel des populations, notamment celui des femmes et des jeunes, et qui se soucie du bien-être des enfants. Il fait ainsi de l'autonomisation des femmes et des filles une priorité non négociable. Mesdames et messieurs, dans ce même élan de développement de l'Afrique autonome et autosuffisante, l'agenda 2063 anticipe environ 70% des objectifs de développement du continent devront être financés à travers la mobilisation des ressources internes et plus particulièrement par le biais des recettes fiscales. Ce caractère crucial de la fiscalité et de l'égalité des sexes pour le développement de l'Afrique place donc la dimension genre au centre des activités de la TAF visant à renforcer les capacités des administrations fiscales, à promouvoir les régimes fiscaux efficaces, à améliorer les actions des administrations fixant en rapport avec les politiques fiscales et à plaider auprès des instances internationales pour l'obtention des droits d'imposition plus équitables pour l'Afrique. De même, les initiatives de modernisation des administrations fiscales africaines pilotées par l'ATAF ne peuvent atteindre leur plein potentiel que si elles tiennent compte de l'importance de l'équilibre entre l'homme et la femme. Mesdames et messieurs, chers collègues, distingués invités, au regard de ces objectifs prioritaires, je ne saurais vous cacher mon enthousiasme quant au lancement de ce réseau des femmes du secteur de la fiscalité de la TAF. Cette structure inédite servira certainement de plateforme d'échange et de réseautage aux femmes africaines travaillant dans ce domaine. Les programmes de ce réseau permettront de redresser les déséquilibres qui existent entre les hommes et les femmes au sein des organisations fiscale en renforçant les capacités des femmes, en suscitant le débat sur les thématiques liées au genre dans notre secteur et en mettant en nu comment les régimes fiscaux affectent les femmes et les hommes différemment. Je suis convaincu que ces programmes permettront également de faire de la politique fiscale un outil puissant pour améliorer l'égalité entre les sexes. Ce réseau est une réalisation d'une très importante dans la lutte pour l'égalité des sexes en Afrique et une étape importante dans l'histoire de l'ATAF, car il servira de lien où les femmes travaillant dans le domaine de la fiscalité, qu'elles soient du secteur public ou du secteur privé, du monde universitaire ou de la société civile, se retrouveront pour faire avancer la mobilisation des ressources intérieures et l'égalité des sexes. J'invite toutes les femmes africaines travaillant dans le domaine de la fiscalité en Afrique et dans la diaspora à se joindre à ce réseau et à contribuer ensemble pour réaliser sa vision. J'encourage aussi mes collègues, nous les hommes, à se positionner en alliés de cette initiative et à ne ménager aucune ressource pour la soutenir. Mesdames, Messieurs, distingués invités, pour finir, je tiens à vous remercier infiniment pour votre participation et votre appui constant aux initiatives de l'ATAF sur notre continent africain. Je déclare ce webinaire ouvert. Bonne délibération à toutes et à tous. Je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Comme vous l'avez dit, hein, l'autonomisation des femmes et des filles est une priorité non négociable. Et je vous remercie également pour cet appel solennel lancé à l'endroit des femmes et des hommes africaines et africains et de la diaspora à se joindre à cette noble cause pour avancer justement cette vision d'autonomisation de la femme dans le secteur de la fiscalité. Pour nous en dire plus, je voudrais maintenant inviter Madame, ou plutôt Docteur Amélia Mwandane, et qui est la présidente du conseil d'administration de l'autorité fiscale du Mozambique et un membre très actif du conseil de l'ATAF pour prononcer le discours liminaire de ce matin. Docteur Mwandane, s'il vous plaît.
Muito obrigada pela oportunidade de fazer intervenção neste momento nobre e solene do lançamento desta plataforma importante de coordenação das mulheres da ATAF. Observando os desafios que se colocam à mulher na gestão dos sistemas tributários, podemos trazer o exemplo da autoridade tributária em Moçambique, onde, num total de 3.848 funcionários, apenas 895 são mulheres,
Docteur Mwandane,
representando
je suis désolé de vous
apenas
interrompre, mais il semblerait que votre son ne nous parvienne pas.
Yes, we can. We can.
Yes. It didn't work in the beginning, but it's working now.
Conseguimos acompanhar todos?
Vous pouvez continuer, docteur, nous vous entendons
continuar?
Maintenant.
Portanto, estávamos a agradecer o convite que nos foi formulado para fazer a intervenção nesta plataforma de comunicação que traz uma interação entre as mulheres de África. E dávamos exemplo da importância de trazer a reflexão sobre a mulher, considerando o papel que ela tem para a sociedade, trazendo o exemplo da representatividade da mulher no sistema tributário moçambicano. Em Moçambique temos um total de 3.848 funcionários e destes, apenas 23% são mulheres. Significa apenas 895 funcionários são do sexo feminino, num sistema tributário que engloba cerca de 4.000 funcionários. Em termos de lugares de chefia, temos apenas 32% das mulheres. O remanescente é ocupado por cargos de chefia do sexo masculino. Isto mostra uma vez mais a necessidade de que a África se una para trazer muito alto a voz da mulher. Começo a minha intervenção saudando o excelentíssimo senhor presidente do Fórum das Administrações Tributárias Africanas, saúdo o excelentíssimo senhor secretário executivo da ATAF, saúdo os excelentíssimos membros do Conselho da ATAF, meus pares, distintos presidentes e comissários gerais das autoridades tributárias africanas, saúdo a todos os presentes, minhas senhoras e meus senhores. É com elevada honra e regozijo que, em nome das mulheres tributárias africanas, me dirijo aos participantes neste ato solene do lançamento da rede do Fórum das Administrações Tributárias Africanas para as mulheres no domínio tributário. Aproveito esta ocasião para felicitar o ATAF por esta iniciativa que certamente ficará registrada como um marco histórico para as administrações tributárias africanas e de todo o mundo, ao consubstanciar o reconhecimento do papel-chave da mulher na dinamização dos processos de desenvolvimento. Agradecemos igualmente a confiança que nos foi depositada a Moçambique pelo secretariado do ATAF ao endereçarmos o convite para dirigirmos o lançamento oficial da plataforma do ATAF para as mulheres tributárias e tomar parte no grupo pioneiro de mulheres integrantes do elenco diretório. Caros participantes, movidos por um espírito de transformação de África, jovens tributários de 28 países juntaram-se em 2009 para a criação do ATAF, visando estabelecer um novo paradigma de funcionamento das administrações tributárias para a dinamização e melhoria da eficiência dos sistemas tributários rumo à sustentabilidade financeira do continente. Num curto espaço de tempo, a ATAF, movido pelo nobre objetivo de ver o continente africano economicamente independente, sustentável e próspero, ganhou visibilidade na economia global e granjeou reconhecimento como a voz das administrações tributárias africanas. Falar do ATAF hoje é falar de sistemas tributários sincronizados e modernos, caminhando céleres para uma visão mais eficiente na gestão dos processos associados à mobilização de recursos. O ATAF lançou recentemente a sua estratégia 21-25, que destaca a pesquisa, a investigação, a economia digital, o setor informal e a sincronização estatística como pilares para o sucesso das políticas fiscais e tributárias africanas. Hoje, surpreende o mundo ao trazer um novo paradigma no qual destaca a mulher como elemento primordial no processo de transformação do nosso continente, brindando às mulheres africanas com a rede do ATAF para as mulheres no domínio tributário. O que é a rede do ATAF para as mulheres tributárias? É um movimento de ideias inovadoras visando elevar o papel da mulher tributária, reconhecer a sua relevância na transformação dos sistemas tributários e criar condições para apoiar as suas iniciativas no desenvolvimento de África. Minhas senhoras e meus senhores, num continente onde mais de 60% da população são mulheres, falar da sua interconectividade é levantar questões que estão muito acima do debate sobre equidade do género, sobretudo quando se pretende que, através desta rede, se destaque o papel da mulher na gestão de processos de desenvolvimento e de tomada de decisões em matérias de tributação. Neste sentido, nós, mulheres tributárias africanas, erguemos os nossos braços bem alto, comprometendo-nos a dedicar as nossas energias e saberes em prol da causa das administrações tributárias africanas e nos propomos a continuar a investir a nossa formação técnico-profissional, a romper as barreiras impostas pela sociedade, quer de natureza social, cultural ou histórica, que colocam a mulher numa posição subalterna e aprender aceitando as nossas limitações e acreditando no poder de uma visão coletiva. Asseguramos que usaremos esta plataforma para fortalecer o diálogo interafricano de mulheres tributárias como veículo para o despertar das nossas mentes e do nosso potencial para os desafios da mobilização de recursos para as nossas economias rumo à transformação econômica e social. A criação da rede do ATAF para mulheres tributárias representa para nós um passo significativo no alcance do 5º Objetivo de Desenvolvimento Sustentável preconizado pelas Nações Unidas no âmbito da Agenda 2030, na medida em que corresponde ao indicador do aumento da proporção de mulheres em lugares de gestão e chefia. Caros participantes, a adesão das mulheres a esta plataforma traz múltiplas vantagens por conseguinte. Vai criar oportunidades de formação e desenvolvimento de capacidades técnicas à luz das iniciativas do ATAF para mulheres, estimular o envolvimento da mulher na facilitação de formações e reciclagem sobre impostos em África, permitir a troca de experiências entre mulheres tributárias africanas sobre os desafios para o seu desenvolvimento profissional, social e econômico, tendo presente as oportunidades trazidas pela sua integração nos sistemas tributários. Promover iniciativas visando a revisão de pares no processo de implementação de ideias inovadoras que concorram para a melhoria da eficiência dos sistemas tributários, privilegiando a equidade do género. Assegurar a criação de um banco de dados de interconectividade entre mulheres de diferentes conhecimentos e experiências, com utilidade no aprimoramento dos sistemas tributários africanos. Estabelecer vínculos entre mulheres de diferentes organizações, visando a partilha de experiências, assimilação de novos conhecimentos e valores que sejam favoráveis à melhoria da eficiência dos sistemas tributários. E estimular as mulheres africanas a assumirem missões de elevada responsabilidade nas administrações tributárias e não só. Para terminar, gostaria de exortar as mulheres africanas das administrações tributárias o seguinte: continuemos a ser parceiros com os homens na gestão dos processos de desenvolvimento das nossas administrações tributárias. Continuemos a estimular o espírito de interajuda para assegurar a rápida transformação das mulheres africanas e o seu empoderamento. E ainda, usemos desta plataforma como mecanismo de interação troca de conhecimentos e autopromoção na perspectiva de criarmos administrações tributárias livres da discriminação baseada no gênero. Nestes termos, tenho a honra de declarar oficialmente lançada a rede do ATAF para as mulheres tributárias. A todos os que prestaram atenção, o meu muito obrigado.
Merci beaucoup, merci infiniment, Dr Mwandani, pour ce discours liminaire. Et merci au président Chaudier et à monsieur le secrétaire exécutif de la TAF pour vos discours très éloquents qui effectivement plantent le décor pour la suite de nos travaux. À cet effet, je voudrais maintenant inviter notre premier panel d'aujourd'hui qui sera présidé par la directrice des programmes fiscaux du secrétariat de la TAF. Il s'agit de Madame Mary Bainey. Comme certains d'entre vous le savent certainement, la direction dont Madame Bainey a la charge est responsable du renforcement des capacités, de l'assistance technique et également de l'action sur la fiscalité internationale au niveau de la TAF. Madame Bainey aura comme interlocuteur aujourd'hui Madame Doris Akol, que certains d'entre vous se souviendront. Elle était membre du conseil de la TAF et ancien commissaire général de l'autorité ougandaise des recettes. Madame Doris Akol travaille actuellement pour le Centre du développement et de la fiscalité. Elle sera aussi accompagnée de Madame Ajra Batamouriza, qui est commissaire des impôts, des revenus intérieurs de l'Office rwandais des recettes. Et le troisième interlocuteur sera Madame Chenai Mukumba, qui est manager chargé de la recherche en matière de stratégie et de plaidoyer pour le compte de Tax Justice Network, qui est un réseau de la société civile qui défend les droits fiscaux des populations africaines. Et le quatrième intervenant sera Monsieur Raphaël Kamoto, qui est directeur des partenariats stratégiques, du suivi et de l'évaluation, ainsi que de la planification au sein du secrétariat de la TAF. Ce panel va se concentrer sur la question de la représentation des femmes au sein des administrations fiscales en Afrique. Comme vous l'avez entendu tout à l'heure lors du discours du secrétaire exécutif, selon la revue des perspectives fiscales africaines en Afrique, dans 34 des administrations fiscales africaines, seuls 24% des femmes occupent des postes de cadre au sein de ces administrations. Donc, pour aborder un peu plus en profondeur ce sujet, je voudrais maintenant passer la parole à Madame Mary Bainey, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Thank you very much, Romeo. Good morning, everyone. The ATAF chairman, the vice chairman, members of council, executive secretary, and our distinguished invited guests. It is my pleasure to chair the first panel as we launch the ATAF Women in Tax Network. And indeed, I want to say that the gender balance in revenue administrations varies from country to country. And, but even for the most conscious countries, like we've heard from the previous speakers, the gap at senior management is very pronounced. An example is in South Africa, where according to the African Tax Outlook, a publication by ATAF, an annual publication by ATAF in 2019, 62% of SARS employees were women. But of these, only 12.5% were in management positions. So clearly there's a serious gap. So, and indeed in our 40 members portfolio, we only have 2 commissioners general as ladies. So it is very clear that there's an imbalance, and this panel will be looking at whether women are well represented at all levels of tax administration. And the way we're going to run this panel is that I will soon be calling out the panel members, and this imbalance, indeed, we will also demonstrate to you that it extends especially to the technical areas. And we will also have a couple of discussions to see how that can be addressed, and so come up with ideas on how not only to just build this network, but to increase the participation of women in tax administration. So with me to have this discussion is a panel of seasoned tax administrators largely, and a researcher in tax, and I have no doubt that they will bring a rich array of examples to inform our subject of the day. So like Romeo indicated, I have the first speaker as Madam Doris Akol, who really needs no introduction because Doris has been at senior policy and policy level and technical levels and grew through the ranks to become Commissioner General. And indeed, she served on the council. So currently she serves as the Senior Policy and Engagement Advisor at the International Center for Tax and Development, the ICTD. Of course, her immediate former role being Commissioner General of Uganda Revenue Authority. So Doris had an opportunity and to serve both at technical and policy levels. And she combines a wealth of practical knowledge on tax policy and administration. So welcome, Doris. I would also like to welcome Hajara Batamwiriza. Hajara Batamwiriza is the current Commissioner Domestic Taxes of Rwanda Revenue Authority. Hajara joined the Rwanda Revenue Authority as an auditor. And Hajara has worked in what is traditionally considered male areas because Hajara worked in investigations. And before she became Commissioner, Hajara headed the International Tax Unit of the Rwanda Revenue Authority. Welcome, Hajara. I'd also like to welcome Mr. Kamoto Raphael, our very own Director for Planning, Strategic Partnerships, Monitoring and Evaluation, and former CG of Malawi Revenue Authority. Mr. Kamoto also combined both technical and policy advice when he was working for the Malawi Revenue Authority. Welcome, Mr. Kamoto. And finally, Chenai Mkumba, who works for Tax Justice Network Africa, a key partner with ATAF, and Chenai is a researcher in tax. So we will be having this discussion. And to kick us off will be a presentation by Doris that is entitled "Are Women Represented at All Levels of Tax Administration?" After that, I will give an opportunity for a Q&A. I will invite the panelists, and after the panelists, I'll give an opportunity for a Q&A. But I'd like to ask the audience that as we go along, if you could please post any questions you may have in our Q&A, and we'll be more than happy to respond to this. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you, Doris, to make your presentation, and the presentation will run for 10 minutes. Welcome, Doris.
Thank you very much, Mary, the chairman of ATAF, Mr. Philip Chodie, the vice chairman, all members of council, the executive secretary, Mr. Logan Ward, my fellow panelists and all attendees, a very good morning or good afternoon from wherever you are joining from. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be speaking today at the launch of the Women in Tax Network. And I think it's a timely venture that we are starting out for us women who are involved in tax matters, and for those women who need to be mentored to join tax, for us to be involved in this initiative. I'll be talking about whether women are represented in tax, at levels in tax administrations, and I'll even go beyond maybe the tax administrations. The presentation will run in this way. We'll give a context to why it is important for us to talk about gender equality and tax. We'll also be looking at the role of women in tax administrations. We'll look at some statistics because they tell a story. various levels, involvement of women in various levels of tax policy at the legislative angle, judicial, and why is it important? And then finally, perhaps we'll look at what must be done for things to improve. The Sustainable Development Goals, specifically goal number 5, recognize the importance of gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. And this is the context in which we are talking about women in tax. Gender equality and taxation are not usually addressed together, and yet taxation can play a vital role in empowerment of women. So it is important for policymakers to ensure that tax policy initiatives that are rolled out, tax policy design, do not have a negative impact on the results that are needed for gender equality. And indeed, for whatever tax policy that exists or tax laws that exist, need to be reformed or reviewed to remove the barriers that are standing in the way of gender equality. And that is the context in which we talk about gender equality and tax. What does the research say? The research focusing on gender and taxation, particularly in developing countries, is not very expansive. The research outputs out there have mainly focused on 2 areas, mainly the representation of women in tax administrations, African tax administrations, and we've had some statistics already being mentioned, but also their impact on tax collection and revenue authority performance. The research is telling us something, that when you employ more women in revenue authorities, there is an impact of their involvement on tax collection. The second focus of the research has been mainly investigating the differing impacts of taxation on men and women. By virtue of the, call it social policy and socioeconomic differences between men and women, the tax policies and tax laws impact men and women differently. And I'll touch on this a little bit because this is not the main focus of the presentation. From a personal income tax perspective, because many women, more women earn less than men, it appears to be that personal income taxes, because of their nature, place a higher burden on women. The effective tax burden on women, because they earn much less than men, is higher in the personal income tax category. When it comes to indirect taxes, because of our consumption pattern, women being responsible for a lot of the consumptive purchases for homes and for all other activities around looking after homes and maybe looking after children, if VAT policies, for example, are not deliberate about exempting or giving a 0 rate or perhaps giving a lower rate of VAT on the common purchases that women make, you find that women will bear an unbearable burden or a heavier burden on indirect taxes and VAT specifically. From the labor and employment perspective on productivity and pensionability, if women do not stay long at work, at the workplace, they may not qualify for pensions, whereas men who do not have the other obligations that women have are more prone to staying longer and serving beyond the ages when they can earn pensions. From a productivity perspective, because of our nature, our childbearing nature, at some point, women are going to have to make a decision whether they should continue working or stay home and look after the children. And this also because of the childcare and all that, it may have an impact on productivity at the workplace. Methods used for revenue collection. For example, in these days, currently, we have a debate about formalization. There's a lot of call by revenue administrations for formalization. A lot of the small businesses are owned by women. Many of the businesses in the informal sector are owned by women. So if we call upon formalization, there is a dilemma because formalization of businesses enables businesses to grow and to be run more efficiently. But it also brings about burdens of compliance. When a business is formalized, then the business owners have to file returns and all the other obligations of compliance. And this might place a burden on these women that are running these businesses because perhaps they are too small to afford the services that they need in order to meet their compliance obligations. So there is a dilemma in that aspect and on other methods used for revenue collection. Beyond the formal tax area, informal taxes, especially at subnational level, you find that many women who are operating, and the research has proved this, many women who are operating businesses, for example, in marketplaces, have to pay what is called informal taxes. They are not typically the formal taxes we're used to, but they place a fiscal burden. The men also pay the same fiscal burdens. For example, toilet taxes. Men also pay toilet taxes, but because of women, maybe we use the toilets more frequently, we'll find that the women in the marketplaces are paying higher fees for use of toilets than perhaps the men. And this places a higher fiscal burden. And these are some of the issues that show that tax impacts men and women differently and why it is imperative for policies to be enacted that reduce these burdens on the women. But focusing perhaps on what it is we are talking about today, the role of women in tax administration. As we all know that tax collection has historically, particularly in Africa, but also in the rest of the world, been very much male dominated. A lot of the revenue administrations in Africa and across the world are heavily dominated by male employees, male in leadership positions. So this has been the trend. It is beginning to change, partly because in which the way taxes are collected now. There is a heavier reliance on IT, there's heavier reliance on technology and other methods of less interface between the taxpayer and the tax collector. And we see many women entering and staying in the profession in increasing numbers. So the way tax administration is being done now has created perhaps a less onerous way of working, and we see many women beginning to join and perhaps also staying longer. Contemporary tax collection is less likely to involve face-to-face interactions between the tax assessor and collector and the taxpayer. There is an increasing proportion of interaction with taxpayers online and taxpayers services conducted using call centers. And we see that because of this change in the business model, a lot more women are being involved in tax administration. Payments being made to banks rather than directly to tax staff also helps the women who are in the back office be able to work in a way that doesn't create certain burdens on them, some of them social burdens, some religious burdens. They do not have to interface with the taxpayer. So these specific changes have, in the character of jobs in tax administration, have improved or contributed to the increasing presence of female employees in tax administrations, not only in Africa, but globally. And we see the numbers growing. But the question is, what should the parity levels be? The statistics are beginning to tell us a story. In OECD countries, women are typically about 60% of the total workforce within tax administrations. But it is true that they also tend to be concentrated in the lower ranks. They also occupy a smaller proportion of senior management positions, even in the OECD countries. Now, in Africa, we are seeing men still being representing the majority of the employees in national tax authorities. Some are doing better than others, but there are changes, there are some improvements. I picked these specific statistics from the African Tax Outlook for 2019, which says, which has spotlighted the gender balances in revenue administration bodies across the continent. We're seeing a lot of imbalance in Gambia, in Ghana, and Nigeria. The top executives at the time when the outlook was released were exclusively male. Hopefully that has now changed, but at that time, the entire top executives in those revenue administrations was male. In Lesotho, Eswatini, and Burkina Faso, they had some top managers who are female, but numbers were not exactly at the parity level. So globally, we still need some work to do. SARS, the South African Revenue Service, provides a very good example of a tax administration in Uganda Revenue Authority, which I'm quite familiar with. URA was one of the few national tax administrations in Africa that has been employing large numbers for many years. And maybe this is a reflection of the demographics in Uganda. As at 2019, and indeed even by the time 2020, women represented about 38% of the staff complement, with a good representation of women at senior management. So there was some effort put on increasing the numbers of women, not only in the staffing levels, but also at senior management. And I think the trend still continues. But clearly, when you look at the statistics, the ATO countries, the African Tax Outlook countries, certainly the countries in Africa, we have to rethink how to accelerate our efforts to build gender equality in tax administrations. There are some countries which were spotlighted in the African Tax Outlook for 2019, for example, Chad, Liberia, Mozambique, Senegal, and Togo, which have not really made much progress, and maybe this is an area of focus for these countries. We have some examples of tax administrations in Africa which have had women at the top helm. Currently, I believe Zimra, Zimbabwe, has a female commissioner general. Cape Verde, Mozambique, we've just had the commissioner from the Mozambican Revenue Authority speak to us, and Seychelles also has a female at the helm. In the recent past, we've seen women heading the tax administrations in Liberia. Mrs. Tamba is on the call. In Uganda, we've had the succession of 3 women CGs in succession of each other. So that's a very good example for the rest of Africa. In Sierra Leone, we did have a commissioner general. And of course, in Rwanda, Mary Baine is on the call, was a commissioner general for Rwanda Revenue Authority. So we do have examples of women leading tax administrations in Africa. And hopefully these examples can be the models for other African tax administrations to follow suit. Why is it important? Why is it a topical issue for the role that women are playing in tax administrations? Again, the research has proven, and based on a study done on URA by the International Center for Tax and Development, they say that women, in terms of performance, found that on average, women perform a little bit better than men on their 6-month appraisals. They turn out better performance scores than the men on their appraisals. They also tend to remain with revenue administration longer than the men. And the research found that women stay on average 12.3 years versus 11.6 years that the men stay in tax administration. And this gives some kind of stability, some kind of, the tax administration is able to retain some institutional memory with people staying on longer. Finally, male employees are more than twice as likely to be subject to disciplinary action than women. And again, this is a result of research. It's not something that is coming out of the blue. So it is important, I think, that more women are involved in tax administrations if you want to have some stability, if you want to have higher performance. Leadership, women have proven themselves as very good leaders, and I think I do not need to dwell too much on this. There's a lot of evidence of this. In fact, Africa right now has made a mark globally because we have a woman in tax. I call her woman in tax because she used to be a minister of finance in Nigeria, heading the World Trade Organization. The first ever woman and first African director, first African to ever hold this post. So we do have excellent examples of excellent leadership by women not only in tax, but also in other areas. So women and leadership is another reason why we need to have many more women involved in tax administration. But also, the more women we have involved in tax design means that more than likely we will have policies and collection methods that focus on removing the implicit biases or other barriers that women face in the tax system. There are those biases that the tax system has or throws at women, not because of the way the taxes are phrased, but because perhaps the way the taxes are administered, the way the tax system evolves. And when we have more women involved in designing of policies and laws relating to taxation, or even implementing these laws, we may actually remove some of these implicit biases. And that is why the discourse on gender and tax in all its forms is very important and picking up steam at this point. Away from tax administration, it is important also for us to talk about the representation of women in the rest of what I call the tax system, the ecosystem around tax. Tax policy units in the ministries of finance or the ministries of revenue. We need to see many more women involved in design of tax policy. At the legislative level, for those women that are involved in legislative assemblies by whatever name called, so that we can have debates and enactment of supportive legislation that is gender-centric. Judiciary, tax justice for women. If we are talking about tax justice for women, when we do not have enough women at the judiciary level, we might not be speaking to the converted. We need some conversion even at the judiciary level, and having more women understanding tax issues at the judiciary level would help. We need to see more women revenue or finance ministers. We need to see more women being appointed into these positions. Uganda has had 2, and I'm sure other African countries have had 1 or 2, or maybe even more. And this is a trend that we need to see more of. We need to see more women leading global and regional tax bodies. Examples I can give at the Global Forum of the OECD, we do have some women leading in that space. And we need to have this replicated in other global and regional tax bodies. Finally, perhaps a point to note, and maybe ATAF also needs to take this into consideration, we need to see more women leading technical assistance and capacity building missions. When ATAF and other tax bodies are sending out technical assistance missions, who is leading these missions? Let us see more women being represented. And that is when we'll be able to say that perhaps we have a good representation of women in the tax system, in tax administration, in tax policy, and in all areas of the ecosystem around tax. So what must be done? We must be intentional about empowering women to take up more roles in tax system generally and in tax administrations particularly. Let us, the women who are listening here, who are in the tax administration, can you be more intentional about taking up leadership roles? Do not be comfortable in the positions that you hold. Seek for leadership so that we can make our mark in tax administration. For those who are just getting into thinking about which careers to take up, tax is a very good area for you to think about joining. Let us all remain mindful that it's not just about the numbers, it's about increasing numbers of competent women. So even as we aspire to take up this space, let us ensure that we are competently representing and not just about having more numbers. So the pathways, one of the pathways, and this is a call to action, role modeling. For those of us who have been there, who have done it, let us be role models and let us be deliberate about mentoring more women to take up this space. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much, moderator. I hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Doris. And indeed, that has been really, really insightful, and you've given very, very good details, especially with regard to what can be done as a way forward, which is really what we as ATAF need, especially as we take forward this network. You have also indicated that there's very limited research. Maybe that's where we can begin, so that even as we start, we understand what needs to be done in terms of increasing both the policy decisions regarding the gender parity, and also the getting means of trying to increase capacity, especially technical capacity among women. But I'd like to call the panelists, and I'm starting with you, Hajara. And Hajara, you have been both in technical tax work, and also now at a policy level, you provide policy advice to your government on what should be done in this area. I'd like to hear from you, in your opinion, what accounts for the gender imbalance? Can you please share that with us in the next 5 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you, Chairman, Mr. Philip Chode, and Vice Chairman, Mr. Edward Kwesa, Executive Secretary of the ATAF, Mr. Logan, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished invitees. I would like to thank the ATAF for the opportunity given to me to speak at this launch of the Women in Tax Network, and of course appreciate the opportunity to speak as a panelist today. There's no way we can really address gender inequality in taxation before we analyze what accounts for gender imbalances from the outset. So this enables a formulation of policies that recognize the role of the gender analysis that it plays in the community, as well as to mainstream and focus on the technical empowerment in day-to-day tax administration roles. And over the years, the world has gotten closer to achieving gender equality, and there has been currently better representation of women in politics, more economic opportunities, but also better health care in many places of the world. However, a lot has to be done and momentum has to be maintained. The World Economic Forum also estimates that it will take some time, more than a century, to have really true gender equality that become a reality in the world. So one would just seek to really ask yourselves, or we ask ourselves, what fosters the gaps between genders. One of those that really accounts for that would be uneven access to education. Women still have less access to education than men in most of the places in the world. And a quarter of young women between 15 to 24 will not finish their primary education. And this group makes up to 58% of the people not completing their basic education. It is said also that 2/3 of all illiterate people in the world are women. When girls are not educated at the same level as boys, of course, their future is hugely affected and limits the kind of opportunity they will get. And consequently, this results in two different differences between men and women, because they cannot fairly compete on the same labor market. As most women with low income tend to purchase more goods and services, of course, promote healthy education and nutrition compared to men, this creates a potential to women, for women to bear a larger tax burden. Like, of course, Dr. Cole has already mentioned. Of course, the tax burden always goes to women because they consume more of the goods and services. And of course, if there are no exemptions or reduced zero rating for indirect taxes, this is going to hinder the status of women in their achievements. Likewise, in terms of the development of technical skills in tax administrations, the less education opportunities given to women, the more reduced the chances for them to hone their skills in this field as in any other. Again, there's lack of employment equality. Very limited countries in the world give women the same legal work rights as men. So in fact, most economies give women only 3/4 the right of men in workplaces. So studies have also shown that if employment becomes a more even playing field, it has a positive domino effect on other areas prone to gender inequality. In reality, policy to support women given additional social roles like bearing children, raising them, this shouldn't be considered as a setback to them, but as a role that should be held, and so extra facilities should be offered to women in society and to bridge this gap. And this should also translate in enabling them to redeem the time and not, of course, to lose on any of the opportunities to promote, to get promotions to higher levels. Again, we see job segregation. One of the causes for gender inequality within employment in the divisions of the allocation of jobs. In most societies, there are misconceptions that men are simply better equipped than females for certain jobs, of course. And sadly, tax administrations also fall in this category. Most of the time, those are jobs that may even be paying more than what is paying to women for their jobs they currently hold. So these discriminations result in lower income for women, and women also take on primary responsibilities for unpaid labor. So even as they participate in paid workforce, they have extra work that never gets paid and never gets recognized financially. And hence this really keeps a big number of women in poverty. I just take an example. In Rwanda, we have 54.5% of civil servants in the public sector. This accounts for men, and only 45.5% are women. So this shows that positions traditionally occupied by men are still dominated by men themselves. And in this regard, technical expertise in tax is largely considered as a male's niche, but in reality has shown that women have also, when they are given opportunity and exposure, they can really perform as well as their male counterparts, or even better. I would just take an example of myself. As Mary already mentioned, I've been really working from, I was employed as an auditor, but now scaled up into grades up to the Commissioner for Domestic Taxes. So once we are given chances, we can grow into high ranks and we can really do better. There's also a factor that goes with lack of protection, and that is mainly legal protection. According to research from the World Bank, over 1 billion of women don't have legal protection against domestic economic violence. So both have significant impact on women's ability to thrive and live in freedom. In many countries, there are also lack of legal protection against harassment in the workplace, at school, and in the public. So these places definitely become unsafe for women once they have no protection, and subsequently they have to make decisions to drop out of school or just to make sure they quit from those places. And of course, these decisions would compromise their limits, and limits their goals. Again, we see lack of political representation. Maybe except from Rwanda, most national parliaments at the beginning of the 2019, only 24.3% had were in the seats as women. But again, as of June 2019, globally, only 11 heads of state were women. Now, despite the progress in this area over the years, women are still grossly underrepresented in government and political positions. And this means certainly the issue that female politicians tend to bring up such as parental leave and healthy care, pension, women taxation, policy change, gender equality laws, and gender-based violence are often not articulated at the best or downrightly neglected. So again—
Angela, I'm going to ask you to move a little faster, please.
Thank you very much, Mary. So I would want just to mention that really, like for example, in Rwanda, we consistently have seen the government encouraging women to participate in different leadership roles. And as a result, we've observed a significant number of women in leadership roles. And so we have significantly seen women getting into these roles. And for example, in our tax administration, the senior management, the executive management organ is now has 44% of women, and therefore the overall occupants of management level leadership are 40% in terms of women occupants. So in a conclusion then, I would like to say that in order to achieve development for all, countries will require to formulate inclusive policy that recognize the role that gender analysis plays in determining outcomes of women and men in the community. So it is worth noting that living access to updated and reliable gender statistics is essential in the elimination of gender blindness in the formulation of policies. I thank you very much, Mary, and I hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hajara, and indeed, as expected, you have done justice to your question. And you really were clear that some of the imbalances are caused by employment inequality. You talked about societal biases and even lack of legal protection, which is quite interesting. So clearly the imbalance exists, and I want to slightly move away now from these issues and ask and get a perspective of what is being done to address some of this specifically through data collection, because as Doris said in her earlier presentation, there's very limited research and there's very limited data even on the subject. And I want to call my next panelist, Mr. Rafael Kamoto. Rafael, I wanted to ask you what attempts are being made by ATAF to improve gender-related data collection in member countries, so that whatever decisions we take and whatever programs we make will actually have evidence based on the data. Mr. Kamoto?
Thank you so much, Mary, as chairperson for this particular session, and chairman and all members of council and colleagues. I thought I could just take that question at two levels. The first, again, is to look at the representation of women in Africa tax administration. And the question will be not just the numbers, but the reasons behind them. You have seen a presentation from Doris where it was indicated that based on the African Tax Outlook of 2019, overall, the average ratio of male to female staff in the member countries was actually 1.91. So close to 2 males against 1 female in the tax administration. You've also heard that in Burkina Faso, Chad, and Togo, there are 4 times more male staff than female in tax administration. At Malawi Revenue Authority, for example, it's 1.77 males to female. But the ratios are different in Botswana, Cape Verde, Eswatini, and Namibia, where there are more females than men in tax administration. So in terms of what ATAF is doing, we're trying to collect data from member organizations, firstly using the African Tax Outlook to look at what's being the representation, on the continent. But at the same time, we're also encouraging that as much as possible, staff that are coming to our workshops, training courses, or conferences are actually equally represented between men and female. But what is more important is not just the statistic of how many males and females are in there, but what has been the impact of those females in those leadership organizations, in those leadership positions in their own organization. Which brings me now to the second point which I wanted to make. And the second point is basically that within the executive positions in the ATO region, 76% are males in those executive positions. In Gambia and Nigeria, all male executives occupy positions, but in Burkina Faso and Eswatini, the balance is actually 50%, between male and female. Seychelles has got only 35% males in executive positions, and in Uganda, as has been mentioned earlier on, the senior management level in Uganda, women account for 46%. So the question really is, what is it that makes those imbalances? Is it the education? Is it the way we recruit people into position? So we're thinking that this particular network will look into those issues and try to address them, and specifically, postulate women into leadership positions. But then we need also to check to what extent the tax administrations disaggregate administrative data on the tax-paying behavior by gender for most tax types. As you've heard before, there have been arguments, there have been questions before whether the overall general performance of tax administration is improved if there are more women in their ranks or in senior positions. And also the other question that's been asked is whether those improvements are beneficial to female taxpayers. As has been said before, we need to do a lot of research. And I know in the research department, we're also looking into to what extent performance of tax administrations are affected by the gender balance. But to do that, we need statistics, we need data. And therefore, apart from the data on numbers of females and males that are available in different positions, whether the executive or overall, we need then to go deeper and look at perhaps the staff performance. And the staff performance may be dependent on the age of an individual or the educational background and the scores given to an employee during the appraisal. We need to get that detail in order for us to be able to say, can we compare staff performance of a female in an organization compared to a male? And then we use that across the whole of Africa. At the same time, we need to look at, do females spend more time in the tax administration compared to men? Do they look at it as a stable organization, or men are more adventurous and they like to get out into other jobs? And as Doris has said, when we're looking at the performance of an organization and performance of the people in there, is it more likely that for women, there are less disciplinary actions taken against them compared to men, So where we're talking about integrity and corruption and other issues, are we able to collect data that shows who is performing better between males and females? So this is an area that doesn't seem to have a lot of, data, involved and collected. So I'm hoping with this network and with the assistance of ATAF and the network itself, we should be able to get disaggregated data that talks about women's participation at different levels, whether it's land ownership or ownership of, of firms and occupations, how many of them are involved in the informal sector. As has been said, the incidence of VAT and taxes on the informal sector, women will be different from others. So there's been some work being done. As you heard, Uganda is has done some researches with ICTD, and I think OECD also has got a few researches done, but we're moving on the right direction. But I thought this network should actually go on to develop finer aspects of data collection, which will then allow comparability between a tax organization and also within tax organizations in Africa. So Madam Chair, I thought I should just give that input for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kamoto, and thank you for even making it easier for me. I didn't want to stop you because I feared that they'd say that I'm, I'm being biased towards the ladies. But let me call now on Chenai, and Chenai will give us a different perspective because, as I said, she comes from Tax Justice Network Africa. And Chenai, if you can please stick to the 5 minutes so that we can be able to answer some questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mary. Just a quick one. I'm having some issues with my
internet. Me who can't hear
so I may need to... Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear her. Yes, I can hear her.
I can't hear her either.
Okay, Chennai, have you muted the your?
Can you hear me now? Perhaps if I turn
original audio.
Can you hear me now, Mary?
Can I ask the technical? Sorry,
can you still not hear me, Mary?
I can hear you. Mary, you might need to unmute your mic again.
Okay, so you can I continue? Is that okay? I've turned off my video just in case that's the problem. Okay, I can see that.
Can the technical team help us out?
Okay, I can see that some people can hear
Hi,
me.
Mary.
So that's
if the speaker could just kindly choose the English channel.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Christine. So thank you so much, Mary, for allowing me to sit on your panel. And I think thank you so much as well to ATAF for inviting us to be a part of this very crucial conversation. So I think the question that was posed to me is, why is it important for Africa to empower women and address gender inequalities? I think it's from a very basic perspective, it's the right thing to do. But I think what the research has shown is that women's empowerment is one of the most crucial points that we need to touch in order to achieve development within a country. Research has already shown that empowering women and girls is key to economic growth, political stability, and social transformation. And so those are some of the key reasons why it's important for us to address this issue. When women are living safe, fulfilled, and productive lives, they're able to reach their full potential. And as such, be able then to contribute their skills to the workforce and raise happier and healthier communities. They also help fuel sustainable economies and benefit societies and just humanity at large. If we take a look at the numbers, a piece of research that I was looking at just as I was preparing for this is that if women were to participate in the world of work identically to men, we potentially could see an additional $28 trillion to the global economy, which is about 26% more than we were expecting to achieve by the time we attain the SDGs. So I think that the case for why it's important for us to address issues of gender equality, for example, is quite plain to see. I wanted to speak, though, I think to the actual discussion of this panel. I've heard a lot of numbers being said in terms of how it is that our tax administrations are including women within the administrations, but also I think within senior executive positions. And I think it goes without saying that there is still a lot that needs to be done in terms of achieving gender equality within our tax administrations. But I want to, I think, add a bit more nuance to this conversation. I was having a conversation earlier today with one of my colleagues. She's the director of NAWI, the African Macroeconomics Collective. And the idea of increasing the number of women within tax administrations and just within the tax system as a whole is an excellent first step. I think it's very, very important for us to ensure that we have women in positions of authority, in positions of power, and are also taking their space within these institutions. But the reason I say it's a first step is because essentially, the reason we're having this conversation is because we find that patriarchy, right, is an issue that we are trying to address as a society. But the thing with patriarchy is that it is systemic. And contrary to popular belief, patriarchy is not upheld only by men, but you tend to find in a number of different communities and societies, patriarchy is also upheld by women as well. And, by no fault of their own, it's just the society that we are being brought up in, that we're being raised in. So in addition to addressing the issue of numbers, in addition to addressing the issue of ensuring, representation within these tax administrations, what we also need to do is also take a look at the ideologies that essentially underpin the people, both men and women, that are within these tax administrations. Because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, it's very possible to have a woman within a position of authority, within a tax administration, but given the societies within which we are raised, still have a patriarchal mindset. Because at the end of the day, it is an achievement to have equal representation of men and women within tax administrations. But more so than that, what we're trying to achieve, right, is a feminist just economy. What we're trying to achieve is a taxation system within a country, within the continent, that is progressive. And so what we need to ensure that as we increase the number of women within tax administrations, we're also questioning the ideologies. What we need to do is make sure that at the center of our thinking, of the work of all of the different officials and executives within the tax administration, we have feminist thought at the center of the analysis. And the way you do this, when you're having conversations with feminists, is that, you need to put power at the center of your analysis. What we need to be making sure is that our tax administrations are highlighting and focusing and identifying the people who are most marginalized within our societies, and making sure that essentially as we start to outwork our tax systems, these people are protected. Often the people that fall within the most marginalized and most vulnerable are women. So what we need to make sure is that even as we begin to implement the different policies that we have within our different tax administration systems, that thinking is at the very core and the very thinking and the very center of our thinking. Because maybe just to challenge you, it's almost possible to have a potentially more progressive male person at the helm of a situation than a woman, which is why I think while representation is important, the questioning and the ensuring that feminist ideology and thinking is at the base of the work that we do is really important. We need to make sure that the people who are at the margins of our society are centered, we are protecting them, and we have a tax system that is essentially tackling issues related to corporate tax evasion, tax avoidance, to make sure that we can fairly distribute the tax burden, right? So that it's not unfairly falling upon women. We need to put women, we need to put people at the heart of our decision making, and essentially ensure that, even as we engage and undertake revenue mobilization, it's not women that we are unfairly advantaging. So Mary, I think those were just a few of the comments that I wanted to make in the 5 minutes that I had, that absolutely it's important for us to make progress in terms of representation. And I think we can start to see that in a number of tax administration authorities. But if we're not seeing the increase in the number of women in our tax administration authorities actually translate into meaningful change for the women in our societies, then we need to take a second look at the way in which we're doing that, and what else we need to do to enhance our revenue systems, our tax systems, to make sure that they don't unfairly burden women. So Mary, back to you.
Thank you very much, Chennai. And I kept a look at the Q&A, and they are not really quite many questions, but there are at least 2. So I will be posing those to the panelists. But I also want to say that clearly everybody agrees there's an imbalance, and that needs to be addressed. But everybody also agrees that it has to be done on merit. So I think that is a key takeaway, especially as we start this network. But there were questions in the chat, and one of them is by Lillian Kumalo, and it's in summary, she's asking that where women head RAs, do they have a better balance of gender in their teams? Doris, if you can please answer that in less than 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mary. I think I wouldn't have a yes or no answer, because again, in the actual activation of the balance, we have to look at merit. So it goes back to the same thing about do not just appoint women because you need to fill numbers. At the end of the day, tax administration is a job, and it's a hard job. It's not a very easy job. So we need to have competent people doing this work. But I think where there is a particular woman leader has her lenses, is wearing gender-centric lenses, perhaps where there is 2 competent people who can do the job, you find that in some cases they may lean towards appointing the women because the men perhaps have already taken up a lot of space in that very area. So it's not just about filling in the numbers, but again, it requires some deliberate action for those women who are in leadership positions, in tax administrations where we have women who are competent to do these roles. Let them be appointed in those roles. But you can't be appointed if you do not apply. And this is why it goes back to, can the women who are competent and who can do this work apply and vie for these leadership positions? That is the first step to being appointed into these positions. And that is the tool that the woman who's leading needs to be able to create the balance in whatever workspaces they have. So I think that's the way I would answer that question. It can't be answered either with a yes or no, but I think it requires some deliberate effort, but there has to be a push factor too. The women who are able to do the work need to front themselves so that they can occupy that space.
Thank you very much, Doris. There was also a question by the chairman where he indicated that in some countries, there are policy decisions to try that are made requiring that women who want to be in leadership also have to take serious decisions regarding bearing children. And ATAF has a very strong view regarding that. And I'll just invite Mr. Watt to respond to that. Mr. Watt.
Thank you very much, Mary. And thank you to the chairman, Mr. Chodi, for the question. So essentially the question refers to some countries in some parts of the world where women were part of the consideration for putting women in leadership and responsible positions is whether, for example, they have children or whether they're planning to have children. And these are part of the considerations. And so if you want these positions, you need to declare that you're not going to have children, that you're not planning to have children. And in that way, you then get these responsibilities so that you are not interrupted in the pursuance of your work. And that for me is how I understood the question. And the question relates to how this is dealt with in certain parts of the world. So my reply is as follows, Mr. Chairman. ATAF is of the strong view that all women must be empowered. Being discriminated against for having families or carrying a disproportionate burden in the home cannot be the basis upon which women are not given leadership responsibility. And in that regard, ATAF will advocate that all women have access to all opportunities, because those responsibilities for women is part of their broader role and contribution within their society, and building families, for example, is an essential part of building communities, and therefore cannot be used as a tool of discrimination. ATAF will never advocate, and we will encourage our members never to advocate a policy like that. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary. I could see Doris nodding. Doris, I'll give you just 1 minute to give your perspective, and then I'll ask the other panelists also to make their concluding remarks in just 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I think for me, my perspective really, and I speak from experience, is that childbearing responsibilities are what makes us women. And to stop people advancing or to stop people taking up positions because they have childbearing responsibilities is the very definition of discrimination. Childbearing is not a disease, it's not a disability, and therefore it should not be used as the reason why people cannot be advanced in employment or cannot even be employed. I think for those kind of perceptions, for those kind of of thought processes around that. I think that is the very essence of why we need these kinds of dialogues, why we need this kind of research, and why we need to remove, those are barriers. We need to remove those barriers to women being empowered. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you very much. Concluding remarks, Hajara.
Thank you, Mary. I think we should really work on the mindset, because in the society we should not think that women are not able. In fact, we should be thinking of empowering them and making sure that we put in place policies that help them really aim higher and achieve their goals. So bringing up, getting children and of course working into their families and trying to raise children should not be a hindrance to their achievements. So I would just say, let's empower women. Let's do our best to put policies that really align with what they can achieve further, and let's give them chances and opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 1 minute, Chennai.
Thank you so much, Mary. I completely agree. I think with everything that the previous speakers have said, I think it's important to ensure that we are creating equal opportunities for women, but also just given the sort of systemic history that we're coming from of patriarchy, at times, providing them with further support than they need, than men need in order to advance within tax administration. But having said that, like I indicated earlier, it's so important for us to also ensure that as women enter into these spaces, they're also aware of some of the gender biases that they may have, and essentially contribute to the tax administration in a way that allows and contributes to a much more progressive taxation system. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Chennai. And finally, Mr. Kamoto.
Thank you, Mary. I was going to suggest that the network should actually build up on the little research that's been done in the past to collect data, on gender parity, and therefore develop a mechanism where they can collect more in order to influence policy. And in most tax authorities, we're actually supposed to give advice to the ministers of finance. So I think data collection that is, responsive to our needs should be encouraged. And I'm hoping the network should be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you for participating. 4 takeaways. 1, that there's need for research on what policy decisions should be taken, constant involvement of women in both technical work and leadership roles based on competence, data collection to support whatever work we are doing, and finally, the need to change our mindset. And I'd like to thank you all for your very, very key inputs and to wish you all great deliberations. I hand over to you, Romeo, with sincere apologies for the time element. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, merci infiniment, Madame Bainé, Madame Akol, Madame Batamouriza, Madame Mukumba et Monsieur Kamoto. Nous retenons en effet des leçons très importantes de ce panel, de cette discussion, les différences d'impact qu'il y a sur les femmes, des politiques fiscales qui sont mises en place, les difficultés que les femmes ont à entrer dans le secteur de la fiscalité et aussi c'est-à-dire les difficultés liées à leur ascension au poste de responsabilité dans ce secteur-là. Quelque chose qui m'a particulièrement frappé aussi, c'est l'intervention sur la nécessité de mettre en place une approche méritocratique, en fait, dans l'autonomisation des femmes dans ce secteur. Je pense que c'est un point très important, mais aussi également la nécessité de déraciner ces tendances patriarcales qui sont la source même de ces discriminations ou de ces déséquilibres qu'on constate. Mesdames et messieurs, mais qu'en est-il des femmes hors du secteur de la fiscalité? Les politiques fiscales élaborées et mises en œuvre par nos gouvernements sont-elles réellement sensibles à la dimension genre? Pour répondre à ces questions et pour nous guider dans ce débat, je voudrais maintenant inviter notre prochain panel qui sera présidé par le docteur Monkam, qui est la directrice de la recherche au secrétariat de l'ATAF. Et comme vous le savez, le département de la recherche de l'ATAF a effectué quelques recherches dans le domaine de l'équilibre des genres au sein des administrations fiscales africaines. Et elle sera accompagnée dans cette discussion par le professeur Atiya Waris, qui est professeur de droit fiscal à l'Université de Nairobi, Madame Elfrida Tamba, qui est membre du comité des experts des Nations Unies sur la coopération internationale et les affaires fiscales. Elle est aussi ancien membre du conseil de l'ATAF et ancien commissaire général de l'autorité fiscale du Libéria. Ensuite, nous aurons M. Edouard Kieswetter, qui est le commissaire du service des recettes d'Afrique du Sud, mieux connu sous le nom de SARS. Et enfin, nous aurons Mme Ifweko Okaoru, qui est directrice et partenaire de la firme Compliance Professionals PLC, et c'est une firme qui accompagne les organismes publics et privés dans les processus de transformation organisationnelle. Je dois mentionner que Mme Okaoru était également membre du conseil de l'ATAF, un membre fondateur en fait de l'ATAF. Mesdames et messieurs, je voudrais maintenant inviter le Dr Monkam pour la suite des débats. Dr Monkam, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Roméo. Si vous voulez bien confirmer que vous m'entendez.
Oui, nous vous entendons.
Juste pour vous dire que j'ai un problème avec ma vidéo, si l'équipe technique peut m'assister, s'il vous plaît.
Très bien,
donc,
merci.
Merci. Bon après-midi à tous. Et désolé, ma caméra semble avoir un problème. Attendez. Donc, je ne sais pas si ça marche maintenant. Bon après-midi à tous et bienvenue dans cette deuxième session du programme qui discutera de la question suivante. Est-ce que le genre est-il pris en compte dans l'élaboration de la politique fiscale en Afrique? Donc, nous savons que la politique fiscale est un outil potentiel pour réduire les inégalités sociales et économiques. Et lors de l'évaluation des politiques fiscales, il est très important de ne pas se contenter d'évaluer la conception des politiques, mais de se concentrer également sur l'impact réel des systèmes fiscaux sur les individus et la société. Lorsque nous analysons les impacts distributifs et sociaux des systèmes fiscaux, nous devons nous concentrer sur l'identification des facteurs et des politiques qui ont un impact. Par exemple, les inégalités entre les sexes dans la prise de décision, l'accès et le contrôle des ressources et les rôles et responsabilités dans les ménages. Donnez-moi une seconde, j'essaie de nouveau d'activer ma vidéo. Est-ce qu'il y a une différence? Non, je ne pense pas. Alors, je vais continuer. Les politiques fiscales peuvent donc être des instruments constructifs pour lutter contre les inégalités sociales et économiques liées au genre, par le biais, par exemple, de l'affectation des ressources, de la redistribution, de la représentation humaine et de la refacturation. Mais d'un autre côté, les politiques fiscales peuvent aussi contenir des préjugés implicites, comme l'a dit Madame Akol dans la session précédente, et parfois aussi des préjugés explicites. Et de ce fait, on crée alors les inégalités entre les sexes. Donc, en ce qui concerne des préjugés implicites, par exemple, lorsque les systèmes, ils apparaissent lorsque les systèmes fiscaux tendent à traiter les hommes et les femmes de manière égale, mais avec un effet inégalitaire du fait, par exemple, des disparités dans les revenus et dans la propriété des actifs entre les hommes et les femmes. Tandis que les préjugés sexistes explicites peuvent être présents dans les lois ou les procédures fiscales qui sont carrément discriminatoires. Cette session abordera donc l'importance du genre dans l'élaboration de la politique fiscale en Afrique. Et pour nous aider à débattre et à décortiquer ce sujet très important, nous sommes reconnaissants à quatre experts qui ont bien voulu se joindre à nous aujourd'hui. Et comme l'a dit Roméo, nous avons le professeur Atiya, nous avons monsieur Kisveter, qui est le vice-président de l'ATAF et le commissaire du service des impôts de l'Afrique du Sud. Nous avons madame Alfreda Tamba du comité des experts des Nations Unies. Et nous avons madame Ifoeko Ukaoru, qui est associée directrice de la Compliance Professional. Donc, sans plus tarder, j'invite le professeur Waris à ouvrir le débat avec une présentation sur le genre et sa prise en compte dans l'élaboration des politiques fiscales en Afrique. Professeur Waris, vous avez 10 minutes, s'il vous plaît. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Am I going to run my own PowerPoint, or is somebody going to do it from me on your end? Romeo? I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Oui, on vous entend, Atiya.
All right, so should I run the PowerPoint from my end, or will you be loading it up on your end?
Can you kindly run it on your end, please?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Atiya, if that's okay, please share your presentation, if that's okay.
Yes, okay, it says I cannot do screen share while the other participant, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to say thank you very much to ATAF. It's a great thing, it's well overdue. It's delighted to see so many in the room. So again, wonderful, wonderful action, and happy to be here. Just want to confirm, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it.
Romeo?
But the share seems
Thank you very much.
The screen seems to be shared with your screensaver.
Can you, and now, because I've put it on full screen, can you see it now?
Still the same, Atiya. Yeah, now it's better, perfect.
All right. Now you can see it, all right, super. So, well, I love looking at African proverbs when we talk about issues of gender. And this particular one really made me unhappy. And so I thought, well, you know, we are starting from a back footing as far as the patriarchy in the system is concerned, which has already been referred to in the earlier panel. And so when I was asked to look at whether gender is being considered when developing tax policy in Africa, this one resonated with me. Ethiopians say that where a woman rules, streams run uphill. And they don't mean this in the positive sense. They mean that it's going against nature. And I think that many different parts of the world have many different types of gender concerns. But when it comes to our part of the world specifically, it is seen as going against nature. And when I hear about the data from different countries that are developing, we have to remember we have 55 plus African countries. Yet the examples that we gave come from maybe only 8 or 10 countries, which is a real reflection of how far behind we are. And I think we really need to remember that as we go forward. So when I began looking at the issue, I tried to unpack it in different ways. And I think there's probably 3 main ways that we need to look at. And they're about the biases. So how do we understand policy? And then how are these biases showing themselves in these different spaces where people of different genders operate? And so when you understand tax policy, you have to understand why it's there. It's there to reduce social and economic inequality. Now, if your reaction right now is that, no, it's not, it means that even approaching tax from a perspective of gender equality is going to go against the way you think as a revenue agency, as commissioner generals, as ministers of finance. And so already it's how you understand the purpose of tax that becomes very important as we begin this conversation. And so one has to assess your design. One has to assess the impact the system has on individuals and societies, but also whether or not there is distribution taking place. When we're identifying factors and policies that impact gender inequalities, we have to look at decision-making, we have to look at access to and control over resources, but we also have to look at roles and responsibilities in households, markets, states as well as organizations. And I heard a lot of reference on women as mothers, but what about women as caregivers? There are a lot of women right now looking after elderly parents across the continent and across the world. COVID is going to change the dynamics of how families are running as we speak. It's going to change the culture of society. And all of these we do need to consider as we go ahead. So even though we were looking at 2019 data, we have to be very aware that that data is old, and that data to a very large extent may not even be valuable in some of these spaces. So when you're looking at tax policy, this is what I look at: social welfare, education, and healthcare, making sure that we're contributing to a female's full enjoyment of their rights when they're engaging in tax. And I can't help thinking about the earlier panel when they talked about women in the labor force and this problem of how to deal with their own personal circumstances and whether they get jobs or not. I would like to see a special HR staff member allocated in revenue authorities for women, so that a woman can go and ask specific questions that have gender-related issues, and that it's a very practical space to go and deal with it. When we're doing outreach for getting people to be employed by revenue authorities, I think we need to look at that as well. So let's go into these different spaces where there are biases based on gender. So the first problem is that we're using a tax system that is a Western or Eurocentric tax system. So of course, there was gender discrimination in the global North. Women entered the workforce. We've inherited 100 years old plus tax systems and tax policies in some cases, which haven't changed. And so they still have these implicit and explicit biases that were there 100 plus years ago in the global North, depending on who you got colonized by. It also means that these biases affect redistribution, because a lot of them still think that the male is the one who is in charge of the family. But we also have a lot of assumptions within ourselves. We have cultural assumptions, historical ones, and then our own experiential ones. All of these, including religion and sociological constructs, all affect how taxpayers pay, whether they pay, whether they register themselves for taxation or not. And so, for example, an example I use all the time, Senegal only has 1% of its population over the age of 18 registered to pay tax. And this is data that is from ATAF's database. So if these are the types of data sets we're looking at, then we need to move very fast, and we need to really widen the tax base in all spaces. Data coming out from COVID is showing that with a lot of job losses, more and more women are now ending up in the informal sector. So whereas previous assumptions were 80% are in the informal sector, now we're talking about 90 to 95%. Now, spending decisions and family responsibilities were referred to in the earlier panel, so I'll not repeat it, but there's also the issue of low fiscal literacy. We talk about literacy having a disparity between men and women, but we also have a disparity in financial literacy, people understanding how their budgets and spending is taking place at the family level. Now, if they don't understand that, getting them to understand issues of taxation is one more step forward. And so we need to deal with that. And of course, issues of occupational segregation, where, for example, tax exemptions may benefit males more than women, females, is something we have to think about as well. So those are taxpayer biases. So what about tax collector biases? This has been referred to as well. Issue of patriarchal societies, my apology for the spelling mistake, it's low fiscal literacy, but also male-dominated systems are pushing back on gender. So while we may have a lot of people in the room today who agree on this issue, and we may end up being a little bit of an echo chamber, we have to remember that this is not what people think. And pushing back on these patriarchal systems means not just talking to the older generation of men and women, it also means talking to the younger ones who are also now perpetuating this dynamic as they try and compete. And I have wonderful examples of young males who are now trying to push back and prevent slightly older females from developing their spaces because they see it as now competition coming up. But also the workplace dynamics are still behind the curve. Tax is predominantly male dominated, and we've spoken about that already. But there's also the other space of tax researcher biases. So gender-related support systems don't really exist. Unless there is real cross-gender support for female researchers, they tend to be sidelined even by those of their own gender. There's this problem of access to research. A lot of it relies on informal networking. And since it's not not possible if you're married and you have family responsibilities. I always laugh about the cigar rooms, the golf games, and the whiskey clubs. And that is where networking takes place, whether we're dealing with tax revenue authority officials like commissioner generals, or we are talking about other spaces. These debates and discussions about gender is not only about the formal engagements. There is a need to change how the informal engagements take place and how networking is pushed forward in those spaces. But there's also spaces within civil societies and institutions. And not everybody is pro-gender parity. And we have to make that very clear. Even getting to this point has taken a lot of push within civil societies to open up the space, not only of rights and discrimination, but now also for issues of pro-gender. And so speaking the language is not the same as acting in a gender neutral manner. And I see this in many spaces. We speak it, but we don't actually action it in our documentation. So what sort of change do we want to see? We need to deal with explicit biases. And I think a lot of those get called out, but we also need to start listing out and acting on implicit biases, looking at contexts, and we need to prioritize them and listen to them carefully. I also think we need standing gender committees with serious action-related results attached to them, because like I heard in the previous panel, we cannot just be talking shop. There must be action and movement. A lot have already spoken about mapping studies and research, and of course we need to keep conversations like this going. But I'd like to end with don't suffer in silence. I think whether you're a man or a woman, whoever you are, whenever there is discrimination, don't sit back. Deal with it, move with it, demand change. It's not going to be easy, but it hasn't been easy till now. I have a publication coming out, and this is where I'll stop. We just wrote a paper, myself and Stephen Dean from Brooklyn Law School, on the 10 truths about tax havens. And we were looking at the issue of inclusion and the problem, and how discrimination, while we are addressing gender, we must also remember it's not just about gender. This debate and problem about inclusion is gender, it's racism, it is global north and global south. It's also on issues of disability. So even while we move forward on this platform of gender, I would like to encourage us to talk about inclusion of everybody in that space. Thank you very much. Romeo, I'll hand back to you there.
Merci beaucoup, professeur Attia, pour votre présentation et pour votre intervention. Donc, vous avez présenté certains facteurs qui expliquent pourquoi la question du genre n'est pas toujours prise en compte adéquatement dans les politiques fiscales en Afrique, et de l'importance aussi de traiter, d'identifier et de prendre en compte les préjugés implicites et explicites. Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation et pour le temps que vous avez respecté. Donc, sans plus tarder, nous allons entrer dans le débat, et j'invite tous nos participants à participer évidemment à travers des questions, à l'échange des questions et des idées, des commentaires dans l'icône questions-réponses. Donc, sans plus tarder, nous allons ouvrir le débat avec nos panélistes, et nous allons commencer par notre premier intervenant, M. Edouard Kisvetter, qui est le vice-président de l'ATAF et le commissaire du service des impôts de l'Afrique du Sud. Donc, si vous pouvez activer votre caméra. Et la première question est la vôtre, et elle est la suivante. Quel est le programme actuel de réforme fiscale en Afrique du Sud, et comment aborde-t-il l'égalité des sexes? Monsieur Kisvetter, la parole est à vous, et vous avez 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Chair. I will try and get as much as I can in 5 minutes, but let me recognize the Chair, Mr. Chody, as well as the Executive Secretary, Mr. Watt. And of course, I would have to recognize 3 wonderful ladies that I had the privilege to meet about 10 years, more than 10 years ago, Ms. Ellen Gadrina, Ms. Mary Baine, and Ms. Ifueko Akari, and I'm delighted to see them again. I have come back to SARS to see you again. Of course, I will very quickly give you what has happened in South Africa, but more importantly, share with you why this is still a challenge. And to say that gender transformation will not happen if, firstly, the men in the patriarchal African societies do not have a personal conviction of the need for women to lead. And for me, that was quite easy because of the influence of many women in my own life, starting with my mother. I need no convincing. And secondly, women have to not rely on men, but actively lead this campaign themselves and clear us out of the way if we become obstacles to their progress. In terms of tax policy, let me quickly say that in 1995, following the new constitution by South Africa, which recognizes non-sexism, non-racialism as some of its core principles, the policies related to gender basis was already repealed. And so for examples of that is marital status was removed as a differentiator. The consolidation of wives' taxes into their husband's return was removed. Separate tax tables were removed. There's now just a single tax table, which is gender neutral. Wives and husbands are treated as separate taxpayers. And all of these issues conflicted with the Bill of Rights and therefore had no place in our law. Then beyond that, recognizing that most households in the low-income communities are headed by women, we did, for example, remove many basic foodstuffs were zero-rated for VAT, and following that also for personal care. Specifically in 2019, something which may seem arbitrary but is fundamental, sanitary pads for women and girls were zero-rated. In terms of the administration, we are currently undertaking some practical work to ease the compliance burden for pensions, specifically women pensioners, surviving spouses who may get income from multiple sources, have a huge tax liability when the assessment is done. And so we're looking at how we can ease that, and that work is in progress. So we're on a journey. I don't think we can claim victory, but significant progress have already been made. I think more importantly, I am tired of my species paying lip service to the empowerment of women. And I wrote a while back that very often I am ashamed to belong to this species. If I were a woman, I would take little comfort from a 50-year vision and aspiration for the Africa we want in 2063. I certainly won't be around, and many of us may not either. I mean, of the 7 aspirations, only one speak directly to women, which is an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women, youth, and caring for children. But that's in 2063. The other 2 speak to inclusivity or inclusive growth and respect for human rights. And so really, we find that at the core of it, we are still too male and patriarchal biased. I believe there are 4 things that we have to address substantively, and we've begun to do some of that at SARS. The first is our constitution and many laws already remove gender discrimination. We must continually tackle every policy and explicitly test it for its gender biases, which still may be implicit. And we have set up a process to do that. Secondly, at the level of conscientization, we have to sensitize institutions. At SARS, we have established a gender-based violence desk headed up by an executive who now serves on the extended executive committee, and therefore it has a seat at the table at the top of the institution. We have also initiated a gender-based violence pledge, and we have already 50% of our employees who have signed up to this pledge. That's at the level of sensitizing. The next is we have to more actively make an investment in leaders. Again, we have appointed a woman leader who drives specifically alongside the work that I do investment in women, a Women in Leaders program. And again, this is represented at the extended EXCO so that its voice is heard at the most important table in the organization. And unless we do that, we continually fall back to our default patriarchal and gender biased organizations. And then lastly, we have to begin to demonstrate that women are indeed capable of leading as men can do. We have a long way to go, but I'm very encouraged by the fact that for our management and executive management levels in SARS, which is grade 8 and up, we are just on 50% represented females. And then for the top 70 executives, we are currently just on 40% with a target to be 50% by 2024. So unless we begin to do those 4 things very explicitly, we will still be 50 years from now talking about our intention. So I think, let me pause there, and I'm happy to engage Madam Chair on any of those issues that I've raised. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Kitzwater. Vous avez démontré que les choses ont déjà commencé en Afrique du Sud, surtout au niveau de la SARS aussi, mais que beaucoup reste à faire. Donc, la Constitution et les politiques au niveau de la SARS dans le sens, et au niveau du gouvernement, en ce qui concerne par exemple la sensibilisation, comme vous avez dit, des institutions existantes, avec la création des unités spéciales qui s'occupent des questions du genre, dont les choses sont déjà en marche, mais beaucoup reste à faire encore. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Kitzwater, pour votre intervention. Donc, sans plus tarder, nous allons passer la parole à Madame Tamba, Madame Alfreda Tamba, du comité d'experts des Nations Unies, avec la question suivante à vous, Madame Tamba. Comment les gouvernements africains, selon vous, peuvent-ils s'assurer que les politiques fiscales et les administrations fiscales soient sensibles à la question du genre, c'est-à-dire sans préjugés négatifs et explicites ou implicites, et qu'elles répondent aussi aux besoins et aux priorités des hommes et des femmes, ou qu'elles contribuent à la transformation des rôles et des dynamiques de pouvoir entre les hommes et les femmes. Donc la parole est à vous, Madame Tamba. Vous avez 5 minutes. Merci beaucoup. Madame Tamba, vous êtes présente? Mrs. Tamba, can you hear us? OK, je vais peut-être passer alors la parole à l'intervenant suivant, Madame Ifueko, si vous me le permettez, Madame Ifueko. La question que j'aimerais vous poser est la suivante. Comment les politiques de recouvrement et les politiques d'allocation et de dépenses affectent-elles les personnes de sexe différents en Afrique? Merci beaucoup. Vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate ATAF for inviting me and for Edward for the warm welcome back to the ATAF network. Really appreciate this and all protocols observed. I think to the question, first, let me just tell ATAF that you've done excellently well in having this network. But could you please also be gender sensitive with your interpreters? I mean, I listen and I'm looking at Nera and I hear a male voice and I'm wondering whether that's her voice. So I think it would be nice to have gender parity in interpreters as well. Thank you. So back to the question. And basically what I've been asked to talk about is how do policies on revenue collection, allocation, and spending impact people of different gender? I believe, very much so. And just to give an example of one of the issues we had to face with when I was chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service in Nigeria, and that was in the personal income tax, where we had the provision for children's allowance. And you had a situation where the men had took more advantage of that, and women complained a lot. that this actually in a sense discriminated against them. And so as a result, one of the changes that, got, amended was shifting from it being called children's allowance to a consolidated relief allowance. Again, just by that shift, again, it became a more gender neutral law. Now, of course, that's not to say that we do not have a lot more areas to work on. I think in terms of the statistics, the Nigerian Revenue Service, for example, today is more all male executive, particularly at the very top levels of positions. But I think there's been some effort, over time, in just ensuring that there's that gender parity, but a lot more needs to be done. So in terms of, the policies, the shift to, a digital revenue collection system, one that is more driven in technology, makes it more, gender neutral than a situation where it was more physical, and you had situations, of, I think again, like research has shown, more men involved in revenue collection than the women. But I think perhaps more importantly is for us to put the data and the statistics together so we can actually truly assess the impact. Because the truth is, without research, one really can't really say. And I think beyond the research is even just sensitizing each and every one of us on this very important topic. I say this because I'm currently the chairman of the Nigerian Tax Research Network, but truly, I personally have been blindsided by not putting this gender issue right on the table. And it was in preparing for this summit that I started finding out whether we're doing enough research in this area to be able to showcase it, at this event. And I was pleasantly surprised, that first of all, ICTD, which is the organization that supports the tax research, network in Nigeria, has a whole section, on gender-based research, which I've never really ever looked at. Okay, and I'm just admitting this because sometimes even we as women don't, focus attention on it. We're so focused on achieving results, showcasing what needs to be done, that we don't do enough of recognizing that we ourselves need to be the champions of ensuring that there's enough policy, that will help push, gender equality all around. And I think it's important that we recognize that. And in this search, I found a recent link to Nigeria of hidden inequalities. Again, it's published on the ICTD website, tax challenges of market women in Enugu and Kaduna states. So one is the research, and you can see that there's actually already some work done in the research, but the other is actually just raising awareness and driving that into policy and ultimately amending the laws. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and I hope that this network will be very heavy on advocacy, on tracking, on sharing experiences, and basically helping women know what's going on, see how they can leverage on what others are doing in other countries, and use that to push efforts, within their own country. Still on how policies on revenue collection, allocation, and spending impact people of different gender. And let's talk about spending, because again, one of the things that needs to be tracked, by research is how much spending is going on girl-child education. Because I love Logan's quote of reference to Ngozi's quote, who was my former boss when I was in FRS, where she says investing in women is smart economics, investing in girls, catching them upstream is even smarter economics. And I think that's one area we're not tracking. I also wear another hat. I'm the president of perhaps one of the old girls' colleges, secondary girls' colleges in Nigeria. And one of the things I find, and what we've done is to set up a girls' force movement, particularly for children at the primary and secondary school level, is that we don't have enough statistics of who is doing what, how far have we achieved, what are we doing, how much is being spent. So again, for me, this platform has helped, bring this up. And I do agree with Professor Waris that it's beyond just an issue of just women. It's really an issue of inclusion, of all, and awareness that we all need to be included, and that even that whole role of women, which I know, because again, I'm also in that space of the elderly, women make up most of the caregivers to the older persons. And I don't think we've actually addressed issues around how do we support that group? How do we recognize the amount of time that is going into that group? And how do we make it happen? And perhaps part of the reason may be that as women, we spend more time just focused on getting the work done. We spend more time focused on getting the work done than stepping back to see how much smarter can we do it by building a better coalition of more women who can do it and reduce the kind of burdens that we've had to carry so that it makes it even less so for those who come after us. So without a doubt, these are very, very important issues. And one thing I'd like to end up with, which I think is very important, beyond just the issue of tracking data, providing that data, publishing that data and getting it all out and making sure we learn from it, is that whole area of the gender-based violence in the workplace. In the workplace, we don't talk about it enough. And if you ask me, one of the unfinished business that I know I started, but I really didn't get into as much as I wanted to. Well, we started building a women's network in the Federal Inland Revenue Service. We had 1 or 2 conferences and then it died. And then after that, there's been no other woman that took over from me. And I think that's an area that still needs to be pushed up, because the kinds of things that are shared with such networks within the workplace, within revenue administration, for me, some of the things that I hear, not just in Nigeria, but in other countries, we all need support. We need support. And if the women are not supported while they're working, if the women are not supported when they are in secondary school or primary school, what happens? That action that Professor Wari said that we should not suffer in silence is an outcome. We will suffer in silence. Because there's a tendency when things happen to just clam up and not speak up. And that then ultimately affects self-esteem, affects self-confidence, and ultimately we now do not resolve the issues that we need to. So this is really an important area. And I really love that South Africa has set up a gender-based violence desk. And I urge all other tax authorities to please do that. Set up a desk within your tax administrative organizations. Set up, enlighten the women, not just the women, enlighten the men on what needs to be done, how to encourage speak up, bring up whistle-blast, policies, not just in terms of where the revenue leakages are, but how women are subverted in the whole process of revenue administration. And I think the country will be a lot, all of our countries will be a lot better for that. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Ifueko. Merci. Vous avez soulevé l'importance de la recherche et l'importance des statistiques, non seulement dans la sensibilisation de la question du genre, mais dans l'élaboration des politiques fiscales aussi, qui résulteront effectivement à un changement concret sur le terrain, tel que l'exemple que vous avez mentionné au niveau de la FRS, dans le changement, la neutralité de l'impôt des revenus, l'impôt sur les revenus des personnes physiques. Donc, merci beaucoup. Et vous avez également renchéri l'importance des bureaux, des comités et des bureaux et des unités créées au sein de nos institutions pour gérer les questions de la violence sexiste. Merci beaucoup pour votre intervention. Donc, si maintenant Madame Tamba est disponible, avec les questions en ce qui concerne sa technologie, j'aimerais de nouveau lui poser des questions. Madame Tamba, vous êtes présente? Madame Tamba? Mrs. Tamba, can you hear us? Okay, if then Mrs. Tamba is not present.
Mrs. Tamba is here, so I think last time she came after a minute or so. Maybe if she unmutes, otherwise if she does come on, you may want to revert back to her because she may have connectivity problems.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Ok, apparemment, Madame Tamba est-elle présente? Ok, toujours pas. Alors, pour une dernière question que j'aimerais poser à Madame Efueko et à Monsieur Kisveter, si vous me le permettez, et on va commencer avec Monsieur Kisveter, si c'est ok avec vous. Comment la TVA affecte-t-elle les secteurs informels et les femmes qui y travaillent au sein de l'Afrique du Sud?
Thank you, Chair. When VAT was zero rated, obviously it was recognizing that for many of the communities that live in relative poverty, or certainly in the lower wage bands, that one wanted to lower the overall cost of food initially. And then, as I said, secondly, other issues that they are regular users of. One of the considerations in thinking about that was an understanding that in many of these communities, you have absent fathers, and they are absent either because women are unmarried and head up households, or they are absent because many still, even though the laws in South Africa have progressed, many still live fairly migrant, in fairly migrant practices. And thirdly, and sadly, many men are just irresponsible and are just not available. So in these communities, the responsibility, unfortunately, not just for childbearing, but also child rearing rests with women. And very often this woman may be a grandmother, or as we call it in Africa, a gogo, whose only form of income is a social old age grant, or an unmarried mother whose only form of income is a child grant. And so it is recognizing that in this segment of our community, the people who bear the brunt mostly are women. And the section of the community who suffer the most, therefore, are the children who are dependent on those women. And so I think it is in that regard that there's a direct link between the imposition of a tax on foodstuffs that either makes it more or less affordable for women. And so the impact is directly on women and on children. The development of that thinking to personal care products also initially was not necessarily included. It was only when you then follow the thinking through that you realize, but it's not just food stuff, it's also personal care, which ultimately led us to realize that even something such as a sanitary napkin is something that does not afflict or affect a man, and therefore they may be insensitive to it. But many young girls don't go to school when it's that part of the month where they go into their menstrual cycle. They're ashamed, they can't play, they can't be socially engaged. And so again, zero rating, as I said, something as simple as one may think about it, as a sanitary pad, has a profound quality of life impact on a young girl or on a woman. I think the main message is that, you know, there's a word that says you don't see what you look at, you see what you look for. And therefore the sensitizing to gender issues is so important, because sometimes, apart from the cultural and the traditional patriarchal constructs of society, there's also just an insensitivity to the lived experience of a woman or a child. And so therefore, sensitizing the conversation, my colleague, former colleague Fueko said that one of the desks, one of the tasks of the gender-based violence desk is not just to speak and to create solidarity events around women. It's also to speak to men, but also have men speak openly about their impact on it. And so the nexus between gender issues and tax policy issues, but also practices within revenue authorities are unmistakable. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Let me respond from the Nigeria perspective. For us in Nigeria, in terms of the informal sector, again, this is an area I'll talk based on my sense of it. There's probably a lot of research out there, but just from the visual view of things, you do find quite a lot of women in the marketplace. And that's one area that actually Nigeria has had for some time, where a lot of those goods, you know, that are sold in the marketplace, in the informal sector, most of which are, you know, VAT exempt. So in Nigeria, at least as of 2020, based on both the VAT Act as well as the Finance Act 2019, you have, as we speak, the following goods that are exempt from VAT: all medical and pharmaceutical products, basic food items, books and educational materials, baby products, exported goods are zero rated, you know, transportation services, locally manufactured sanitary towels. Some of the issues that had been on the table even before this time, you know, when I was in FIRs over 10 years ago, were more of the issues of how do we define these items. And I think what has happened is some clarity around what, you know, baby products are, what educational books and materials are, you know, and, you know, clarity around who is eligible, are those who manufacture these goods eligible, or those who sell. So I think we've done well in that regard, even though I must say that one thing that remains on the table is a wholesome review of the VAT Act in totality, to reduce the overall burden, particularly in the way it is applied just by virtue of the law itself. And that's work in progress, you know, but that's really not a gender-driven issue, that's just general. So specific for VAT, you know, those things that, you know, I would say are more in the purview of the informal sector, for the most part, they are VAT exempt. So that's really not a challenge for us. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Chair, if I may just add quickly to that, also in South Africa, for the informal sector, I left that component out. It is also very important that we recognize that many informal traders, many small business people in the informal sector are in fact women. And so any tax provision, both in the tax policy, but also the administrative simplicity, have a direct impact on the cost of doing business, but also the impact on women-owned businesses.
Merci beaucoup,
Madame. I think that's, sorry, I was going to say that we should celebrate that. You know, I don't think we celebrate that enough. You know, so I think while we beat ourselves on what we should do more for, you know, for women, we should also talk about what we have done. So that way, that encourages more to be done. You know, so I think we do need more of that sensitization. Thank you.
Ok. Merci beaucoup à Madame Ifouiko et à Monsieur Kitzwitter. Madame Tamba, vous avez écouté les deux intervenants qui ont montré comment on a utilisé les politiques fiscales sur la TVA pour alléger la vie des femmes et la vie des actrices dans le secteur informel, la vie des femmes en général et des grands-mères à travers les exonérations fiscales sur des produits clés qui affectent la vie de ces femmes-là. Si vous me permettez, j'aimerais vous demander d'élaborer un peu plus sur cette question-là, en nous disant par exemple comment les gouvernements africains selon vous, peuvent-ils s'assurer que les politiques fiscales et les administrations fiscales soient sensibles, continuent d'être sensibles à cette question du genre, et qu'elles répondent aux besoins et aux priorités des hommes et des femmes, et qu'elles, en fait, effectivement aussi contribuent à la transformation des rôles et des dynamiques de pouvoir entre les hommes et les femmes. Quelle est votre opinion à ce sujet-là, Madame Tomba? Merci beaucoup. Vous avez 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me stand on previous protocols while registering my thanks for the opportunity to be amongst the distinguished speakers at this auspicious game-changing forum. Firstly, let me memorialize my profound commendation to Lokin and his dynamic team for this worthy initiative. I have followed some time ago on Twitter the European Women Tax Network, and it was my ardent prayer that one fine day, Mama Africa, through ATAF, will launch such a network. And here we are today, less than 3 years at the verge of historic making. Thanks again to the team ATAF for what you continue to do for our beloved continent. Let me now proceed to the question. There are many emerging perspectives on this topical issue. Some advocate for a special lower tax bracket for women doing similar jobs as men. This populist policy is gaining limited traction in certain quarters, like in Spain, where the opposition is contemplating introducing a lower tax rate for women. India, on the other hand, introduced a similar policy with lower taxation for women, but that has been discontinued some years ago. Personally, my own view, I do not subscribe to explicit biases. I support a balance where competent women are empowered through skills building so that they are competently empowered through different spheres of education and are strong enough to compete with men. I will dissect the question and treat as 2 questions. With respect to the first section of the question on how can government ensure the tax policy and fiscal administration are gender sensitive, not having explicit or implicit biases. For me, education, empowerment, training, education, those should be our hallmark as we prepare our young people to take the rightful places in the world. Government could ensure greater gender responsiveness in the design phase of policy formulation, using gender as an analytical tool, not only in the design phase, but also in the implementation and citizen sensitization phases. This should include training rural women to be included in the analysis. When undertaking the impact analysis, various categories of women should be analyzed in order to assess potential impact of the intended policies on the target groups. We should not leave, and also I think we should not leave out the boys, because eventually we could be creating another problem. By involving or engaging women in the design phase, undertaking consultation with women, and importing the best outcomes in the final policy design.
Mrs. Tamba, can I interrupt you for a second? Have you selected English?
Yes.
Have you selected English? Have you muted original audio?
No. Is it French?
Please, somebody can you?
No,
can you confirm if we can hear Mrs. Tamba now?
We can hear her now.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed, Mrs. Tamba.
Okay. By involving and engaging women in the design phase, undertaking consultation with women, and importing the best outcomes in the final policy design. Women should also be encouraged to participate in the public hearings at the legislature. Like in Liberia, we have public hearings. But do we carry women that have been involved in the design aspect, in the consultation? Normally, you will find more men. So
we still can't hear.
Our encouragement here is to also incorporate women at the policy, at the highest policy making forum. That is the legislature. The need for analysis using various scenarios cannot be overemphasized. In order to test responsiveness of the results, we should not leave out the boys, or we will risk creating serious discontent in the future. So somewhere there, we have to strike a balance, really, with the younger boys. Government can create greater opportunity for women so that they are more empowered educationally, including free technical education, trade skills, right to inherit from their ancestors, right to inherit from their husbands. Like in our setting, women cannot inherit properties from their husbands. We recently had to pass a Land Rights Act. We seek to address those inconsistencies. Government could incentivize certain sectors wherein women tend to dominate, such as petty trading, farming, nursing, to name a few. This can be implemented by offering full scholarship as applicable to any female desirous of pursuing taxation, nursing, agriculture, computer science, engineering, geology, heavy duty equipment, and any other sciences. In my valid opinion, the path to enhancing responsiveness is through skills building, education, and sustained empowerment of women. We have a saying in Liberia, when you take a man to fish, you train him how to fish, and you can go back tomorrow and he will be able to fish. So, I do not subscribe to the emerging phenomenon of introducing lower tax rates for women, performing the same jobs as men. Like I said before, my strategy and advocacy is through education, training, building skill sets, so that people are empowered and they are proud of their newly acquired skills, and they are more marketable that to me will be the avenue to pursue. Social protection policies that are gender responsive should have a mix. So you have the revenue and you have the expenditure. So it is the expenditure component that we need to encourage our government to improve and invest in more social programs, because investing in social programs will solve a lot of the problems we have now in Africa. So there is a need for reprioritization. How do we get the message to the legislature? Maybe through civil society, NGOs, but there is definitely a need to invest more in social services. This brings me to the second aspect of the question. Gender transformation.
If you can help us wrap up, Mrs. Tamba, that will be very much appreciated.
Okay. Gender transformation to shift in and transformation of gender roles, power, and dynamics. Such measures, if well implemented, will facilitate the transformation of women and transition and position them for higher earning jobs. Training, let me emphasize again, training, skills building at all levels, and committed empowerment, concomitant empowerment could be a game changer for women. This can be facilitated by targeted item-bound performance-based incentive. So if you have time-bound performance-based incentive, this will also help. The incentive approach is an underpin of government revenue expenditure policy. So government—
Mrs. Tamba, please allow me to, can you please wrap up in the next minute, please? Thank you so much.
Okay.
I apologize, we're way behind time. I apologize for that.
Okay, government can incentivize citing social sectors, and this will definitely help women. As a forward action, I admonish ATAF to establish more specialized programs that seek to empower, and I am concerned as to whether the Executive Master Program is still ongoing. Under this program, more women could be identified that is, if they meet the prescribed standards. So if the women meet the prescribed standards, then of course they can qualify. They can be coached and they can be mentored. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mrs. Tamba. I apologize very much for rushing you.
No problem.
There you have it. Mrs. Tamba is stressing the importance of education, of training, as well as basically strengthening the competence of women in order to continue to influence tax policies on the continent. So I will take this last opportunity, if that's okay. Please, Mr. Ifweko, if you have one word to say about this debate, what would that be? And then we'll finish with you, Mrs. Ifweko.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. One last thing is to say thank you for this platform, and also to show that it's really important we share our experiences. There's a network for women in international tax, just for women. So I think beyond just working amongst ourselves as ATAF, we should also share with other platforms, share experiences, sensitize within ourselves. Some of us may have the power to do certain things, but it just doesn't occur to us. So I think this is very useful that we set goals, achieve those goals and empower women a lot more. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you for your last word. Mr. Kisveter?
Thank you. I think that just in short to say, we as men have to accept that we are more than half of the problem. Because if we don't, we continue to justify and rationalize something which is fundamentally unacceptable. Obviously, one has to be sensitive to cultural issues, etc. But I think ultimately, cultures must be dynamic and progressive, and also not abused to protect practices which is unconscionable. Secondly, I invite every woman in our organization and every woman on the call today to become more activists. Very often I am surprised at how tolerant and how patient women are to issues that fundamentally affect their well-being. And then thirdly, I want to join in my colleague who said earlier, we must begin to celebrate and share the practices that actually do work, because the demonstration effect is what ultimately will also persuade the disbelievers who still find some justification for an inequality practices between men and women. Our commitment is to work hard to be the change we wish to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Mrs. Tamba, if you have one last word to the audience, if you want them to leave with one thing, what would that be for you?
Training of our girls, education, so that we build the skill set so that they can competently compete with men.
That says it all. Thank you very much to the presenter. Unfortunately, Professor Atia Waris, she had to leave us because of other commitment. And thank you very much to all our panelists for joining us for this conversation today. I apologize that it took a bit longer than scheduled, but thank you very much again. And Romeo, the floor is back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Merci à vous, Dr Monkam, et à vos panélistes pour ces échanges tellement révélateurs, hein, des impacts des politiques fiscales sur la vie de tous les jours des femmes. Il ne nous reste pas beaucoup de temps, mesdames et messieurs, mais c'est clair que le débat continue. Et comme le vice-président de l'ATAF l'a dit tout à l'heure, il ne s'agit pas simplement de continuer à débattre, il s'agit aussi de joindre l'acte à la parole. Et c'est cette prochaine étape-là que nous attendons de tous les participants et de l'ensemble des gens qui travaillent dans le secteur de la fiscalité. Donc, ça donne matière à réflexion. Pour la suite du programme, bien qu'il ne nous reste pas beaucoup de temps, nous ne pouvons pas conclure sans donner l'opportunité à ce panel d'échanger également. Il s'agit du panel qui va procéder à la cérémonie réelle d'ouverture du lancement de ce réseau. Et pour présider ce panel, nous avons Madame Varsha Singh, qui est non seulement conseiller spécial du secrétaire exécutif de l'ATAF, elle est également la coordinatrice de ce projet du réseau des femmes du secteur de la fiscalité de l'ATAF. Avec elle, nous avons comme invité le docteur Yeo Dosina du département des affaires politiques de la Commission de l'Union africaine, des affaires économiques, pardon, de la Commission de l'Union africaine, et Madame Véronique Hermini, qui est commissaire des impôts à la Commission des recettes des Seychelles. Ensuite, nous avons Madame Alain Kajina, un autre membre fondateur de l'ATAF, qui est actuellement directrice exécutive de l'Autorité nationale routière d'Ouganda. Et enfin, nous avons quelqu'un que vous avez déjà écouté tout à l'heure, le secrétaire exécutif de l'ATAF, Monsieur Logan Worth. Madame Singh, quand vous êtes prête, la parole est à vous. Merci.
Thank you, Romeo. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon to the ATAF chairperson, to the vice chairperson, the executive secretary, commissioner generals present, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to be moderating this session, which is the launch of the ATAF Women in Tax Network. As we have heard from the panelists before this, for the last two sessions, this platform for women in tax is very apt, and it comes at a very appropriate time as we are facing the post-COVID pandemic and the issues that is coming out of there for women, not just in the workplace, but women in all spheres of life. We've heard that education, healthcare is essential, that we need to put that at the forefront. But from a tax perspective, importantly, we've heard about what we need to do from a tax administration perspective. The SARS commissioner shared with us some of the activities and the initiatives that SARS has launched, which I think is the type of thing we want to see in this platform. We want to see more peer-to-peer sharing of good practices that can be shared by other tax administrations. From a tax policy perspective, we've heard about the bias that there is in the tax system. We've also heard about the data that is not there, that there is little research. And as the African continent, we need to do more on these things. We need to open the platform, we need to open the debate, and we need to ensure that we bring this to the fore. We need to make sure that, as one of the speakers indicated, from a technical perspective, that we bring more women to core technical areas in taxation who are leading and will lead some of our missions. This is something that ATAF has key on our agenda, and we are ensuring that when we have different missions as well as different panels, we are advocating for to have a diverse panel and not a panelist. So these are some of the things we are taking very serious. So just in terms of looking at the last year, we've seen women play a very important part in the pandemic as health workers. We've seen them take this on in addition to the many other functions and roles that they play in the home. We've also seen we've seen women coming to the table, and with that, we've seen the first Director General for the WTO, a woman being appointed, and an African. So there has been some strides in this area, but we need to do more, and the time is now. So with that, and to share the vision of the network and to officially launch it this afternoon, I have on the panel Dr. Dosina, who is the head of the Economic Policy and Research Department of the African Union Commission. I have Ms. Veronica Hadmin, who is the Revenue Commissioner for Seychelles Revenue Commission, and Mrs. Ellen Kajina, who is the Executive Director of the Uganda National Roads Authority, and of course, Mr. Logan Watt, who is our Executive Secretary of ATAF. So, Dr. Dosina, to start with you, Aspiration 6 of the Agenda 2063 calls for an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and youth, and caring for children. Can you comment on the link of the network to Agenda 2063? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the floor. I would like to take this opportunity to thank ATAF for inviting me. I don't know, I'm trying to turn off my video, but I feel that it's enabled, so I can speak like that. I can speak, if you don't mind.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this important event to discuss the role of women in taxation, particularly the link of the ATAF Women in Tax Network to Agenda 2063. Since there are interpretation, let me speak in French. I don't know if you allow me.
Yes, please do.
Yes,
but
merci beaucoup. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, we are from many francophones. Let me read my speaking French. En fait, ce que je voulais dire, il y a beaucoup d'inégalités en Afrique, comme vous le savez tous. Les inégalités sont persistantes dans tous les domaines de la vie socio-économique de l'Afrique. Et ce domaine, le domaine de la fiscalité n'échappe pas à ce genre d'inégalités qui existent. Et cela est même plus prononcé dans le domaine de la fiscalité. Le rapport, nous produisons au niveau de l'Union africaine beaucoup de rapports avec des statistiques, notamment le rapport sur le progrès de la mise en œuvre de l'agenda 2063 et aussi le rapport sur la mise en œuvre de l'agenda 2030 des Nations Unies. Nous produisons ensemble ce rapport et dans ce rapport, nous notons dans tous les indicateurs qui sont proposés dans ce rapport-là qu'il y a toujours une différence en genre. Souvent, les hommes sont plus avancés par rapport au progrès réalisé sur ces indicateurs-là que les femmes. Donc, comme il est dit, effectivement, cela existe dans tous les domaines de la vie active et socio-économique de l'Afrique. La vision, qu'est-ce que la vision, l'agenda 2063 propose aux Africains? L'agenda 2063 se veut comme une Afrique axée sur la personne. Donc, ça s'appuie particulièrement sur le potentiel de chaque secteur, le potentiel de l'homme et de la femme. Et nous pensons que la femme étant avec un même potentiel que l'homme, nous devons aussi donner également la même chance aux femmes et qu'aux jeunes afin de pouvoir atteindre l'agenda 2063. Donc, la vision de réaliser cela, il faut nécessairement une égalité de genre dans toutes les sphères de la vie socio-économique. Ensuite, intégrer aussi la jeunesse dans cela, afin d'autonomiser la femme et aussi autonomiser les jeunes afin qu'ils puissent contribuer efficacement à la mise en œuvre de l'agenda 2063, afin que nous ne puissions pas laisser une couche socio-économique pour compte. L'objectif 17, qui est l'aspiration 6 de l'agenda 2063, se veut comme une Afrique dont le développement est motivé par la personne, s'appuyant sur tous les potentiels, comme je viens de dire, de tout le peuple africain, particulièrement les femmes et les jeunes, afin qu'ils s'occupent également des domaines prioritaires qui sont les domaines prioritaires de la vie socio-économique. L'agenda 2063 voudrait également, pour que cela puisse être mis en œuvre, pour qu'effectivement que la parité des gens puisse être atteinte. Les femmes devraient occuper, comme vous le savez, au même 50% des postes élus et dans tous les organes étatiques, que ce soit l'Assemblée nationale, les mairies, que ce soit toute une représentation étatique, les femmes devaient également représenter 50% de cela. 50% des postes de direction dans le gouvernement, dans le secteur privé, parce que nous ne voulons pas laisser le secteur privé en reste. Nous voulons que, autant que le gouvernement applique cette directive, le secteur privé doit aussi également appliquer cette directive-là. Mais cependant, nous avons entendu, et je pense que M. Logan, qui est le secrétaire exécutif de ATAF, l'a bien prononcé ce matin, nous avons seulement 24% de femmes occupant ces postes de direction, selon les perspectives fiscales en 2019. Nous pensons que ce chiffre n'est pas vraiment acceptable. Il est loin d'être atteint, de 50%, nous sommes actuellement à 24%, il est loin d'être atteint, nous devons travailler ensemble avec tous les partenaires pour l'intégration des questions du genre dans le domaine. Et nous pensons que la fiscalité ne devrait pas aussi rester en reste. Donc, en ce qui concerne la Commission, nous sommes heureux. La Commission est très heureuse du lancement du réseau fiscal des femmes d'ATAF, qui constitue pour nous un grand pas vers la bonne direction. Et nous avons, en tant que l'Union africaine, nous allons soutenir ATAF afin que ce réseau puisse être fonctionnel. Pour notre part, en tant que l'Union africaine, comme vous le savez, nous avons de nombreux programmes en place pour assurer l'égalité du genre. Nous pensons que cela doit être fait, non seulement dans tous les programmes que nous élaborons, nous devons impliquer la femme dans la planification, dans le développement des programmes, ce que nous avons fait jusqu'à présent, dans leur mise en œuvre et le suivi et évaluation avec toutes les mesures qui sont prises, que nous puissions assurer effectivement de leur mise en œuvre effectuée sur le terrain. Nous allons continuer à promouvoir le genre. Vous savez que l'Union africaine a beaucoup de documents qui parlent de genre, mais la mise en œuvre est souvent difficile parce que nous n'avons pas de pouvoir coercitif sur les États membres. Et la seule chose que nous pouvons faire, c'est de pouvoir faire le plaidoyer, la sensibilisation pour que effectivement les États membres puissent vraiment appliquer ces décisions ou ces règles ou ces programmes qui sont développés au niveau continental et qui ne sont pas réellement appliqués sur le terrain. Pour ce qui concerne l'Union africaine, ici, au niveau du management de la Commission, comme vous le savez, notre leadership est paritaire. Le président, le vice-président, le commissaire sont au nombre paritaire. Et dans l'ancienne commission, nous avons 5 hommes et 5 femmes. Dans la nouvelle commission, avec la nouvelle réforme, nous avons 4 femmes et 4 hommes. Donc, vraiment, le quota, cela est appliqué au niveau du leadership de l'Union africaine. Maintenant, une décision a été prise en février dernier par le chef d'État afin qu'un quota soit installé en ce qui concerne tous les postes de la Commission de l'Union africaine, que ce soit le poste de directeur, le poste de chef de bureau et tout le personnel de l'Union africaine, les quotas doivent être appliqués entre femmes et garçons et aussi la prise en compte des jeunes dans ce quota-là. Donc, voici vraiment ce que nous sommes en train de faire. L'Union africaine aussi a lancé du fonds pour l'intégration des gens. Nous avons lancé aussi, nous travaillons aussi sur l'inclusion financière des femmes, afin que les femmes soient plus autonomes en recevant de l'argent, qu'ils puissent se prendre en charge. Parce que nous savons quand une femme a de l'argent, une femme est autonome, cela a un grand impact sur non seulement l'éducation de la famille, aussi sur la santé de la famille. Donc, sur l'autonomie des femmes, l'Afrique va vraiment atteindre l'agenda 2063 et nous voulons vraiment saisir cette occasion encore pour féliciter ATAF pour le lancement de ce rapport et dire à ATAF, le secrétaire Logan, que nous sommes prêts au niveau de l'Union africaine pour l'accompagner dans la mise en œuvre et le soutien dont ils ont besoin pour que le réseau ATAF soit vraiment effectif sur le terrain. Je vous remercie. Merci.
Thank you, Dr. Destina. Thank you very much for that input and for showing what the African Union Commission is doing to address gender, as well as for giving us the assurance that the Commission will be working with ATAF on this initiative and to make sure that we bring gender equality empowerment to the fore. I would like to then pose a question to the next speaker, Ms. Veronica Admini, as one of the few women in revenue administrations that are at the head today. Please share with us your hopes for the network and the expected outcomes, both as an African leader and a woman in tax. Over to you.
I would like to start by thanking the African Tax Administration Forum for taking this initiative in bringing together women in tax around the African continent. And I appreciate this opportunity to inspire other women, colleagues, to not only join the network, but to also make a career in taxation. When I first received the invitation to participate in this event, the first thought that came to mind was what an ingenious way to connect, inspire, challenge, and empower women to take on vital leadership roles in taxation. With 37 member countries making up ATAF, each with its own culture and perspective of the role of women in general, it is a great platform to grant women in tax in Africa a voice to shine and grow professionally. Very often, even where there are equal opportunities for personal and professional growth, we tend to marginalize or discriminate against those with potential for other reasons. My personal journey is such that I welcome any initiative promoting gender equality and women empowerment. And I have high expectations of what this network should aim to achieve. Coming from a small country with equal opportunities for all, I appreciate the challenges being faced by other revenue authorities with regards to gender imbalance, and I thus hope to see the network as a community for intelligent and knowledgeable women in taxation, sharing their knowledge and experience on topical tax issues, a mechanism of support for bringing like-minded peers, ambitious and passionate women together to influence tax policy change, especially those affecting women. A celebration of individual success of members reaching important milestones in the furtherance of their career and recognizing excellence in our women. A training ground for career development, development workshops and capacity building with the potential of identifying future trainers and experts for ATAF, as well as for the revenue authorities. By providing educative materials through the network, our women can educate themselves without absenting from their homes and families. A sharing platform for good work practices when it comes to women in employment, especially covering reconciliation of family and work life, flexible working arrangements, sexual harassment, discrimination, and bullying. A matching tool for sponsorship programs for women to follow gender-specific leadership training in order to fix the gender gap in taxation wherever this exists. A forum may be for facilitating investment, bringing potential investors together with women tax experts of the country of interest. A culture club promoting virtual and in-person networking trips for exemplary women employees in tax to inspire other peers in both personal and professional growth. A sorority of sisters mentoring and sharing with each other lessons learned on matters relating to tax and other areas of interest and break down any barriers. And lastly, a family of friends without borders to cultivate lifelong mentorship and friendship. I therefore see opportunities that would make this network more than just a hands club, and for its continued success, ensure that it makes use of all available web-based platforms to surpass borders for greater participation and emancipation of women in tax. Professionalism in tax extends beyond revenue authorities and administrations, and membership should also include tax lawyers, tax agents, consultants, and tax policymakers. As the head of the revenue administration in Seychelles, I am therefore all for giving value to this network and to encourage women from the Seychelles involved in tax to also participate. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your inspiring words, and also much of what you've said talks to the vision and the objectives of the network. I know that this is an excellent topic and it is something that we all want to talk about, and we are running over time, so please bear with us as we continue and officially launch the network. Ms. Kijina, over to you. We've spoken a lot and we've heard a lot this morning and today about Agenda 2063, about the UN Sustainable Goal, especially SDG 5. And these are supposed to be looking at addressing the long-standing issues of gender inequality and gender inequity, as well as the power balances that exist. But as a women leader on the continent in various spheres of government, including Commissioner General of Uganda, can you please provide your input and your experience as a leader and the important role the network plays for the continent? Thank you. Over to you.
And thank you, ATAF, for inviting me to this webinar. I always enjoy the engagements that ATAF puts out there. Congratulations on another ATAF product. I am in a completely different field right now from where I was a few years ago, and the difference could not be made more stark than in the balance of women and men in the workplace. As you heard Doris say a little earlier, the women in URA, I think, constitute a little over 30%. When I joined this organization, Uganda National Roads Authority, 6 years ago, women were only 5%, and there was none in top management. Today, 6 or so years later, we are inching a little bit higher, and we are 17% and 40% at senior management. So we're getting there slowly. What is the problem we're dealing with? In African society, where women are marginalized, poverty is evident. So I think the problem we're really dealing with is poverty. The marginalization is rooted in discrimination in the education system, in the education, not indication system, and also in the marketplace. This marginalization devalues the woman in her own eyes, in the eyes of her children, in society, and therefore little motivation to actually punch higher. What is the solution? My opinion, create deliberate women promotion opportunities. And not just promotion in numbers, but promotion in decision-making positions. 2, women position yourselves for promotion. Opportunities arise in many countries, as you've had statistics throughout this webinar. But is there a woman positioning herself, or is she expecting to be positioned? What do we need to do to increase the motivation for women in leadership? Because sincerely, there are women who have absolutely no ambition or motivation to be in that decision-making position because it's just don't want to make the difficult decisions. Then part 3, deliberate policy on access and control of resources. Let's be frank, if I have no power over finances, I can't make much decisions. So one of the advantages for me over my number of years in leadership has been that I can access resources, I control how resources are used, and therefore can actually make a difference in the lives of women. What is the result when we implement these solutions? Sustainable growth and development, reducing poverty for the woman, and achieving gender equality. My own experience, maybe we'll go back many, many years ago, because I'm here where I am because a woman broke the cultural norm and educated me even when she had little education herself. So my life is really a tribute to my mother, who, with the little education she had, she insisted that we, the girls in the family, had to be educated just as well as the boys. Much later in life, another woman opened the door for me to be in the tax arena. A woman who saw perhaps something in me when I approached her and was very frustrated with the way a man was pushing me down, and she opened doors for me which have continued to open along my career. Another woman I pay tribute to. Since then, it has been my absolute privilege and honor to open doors for other women in places of authority, access and control of resources. And even as I do that, I want to encourage the women group here and the tax network, the Women in Tax Network, to pay the privilege they have had in leadership, to pay it forward. There is a lady out there, there's a young girl out there that you can lift and catapult her into leadership positions. So what is the role of this network? How will it help Africa? How will it help women? What I'd like to see is deliberate fiscal policies targeting women and women groups to realize increased incomes at household levels. Deliberate, not a general platform for men and women, because sincerely, the women who may not actually go for those opportunities. So there must be positive discrimination for women in fiscal policies so that they can access credit easy, so that they can have tax policies tailored towards women businesses, even at household levels. For example, women-owned corporations or business units having tax incentives that will allow them to have more take home at the end of the month, at the end of the year, and which we know that when a woman has more money, she doesn't invest in herself, she invests in her children, she invests in the growth of her business. And I think tax policy is one great opportunity. That's where I think the Women in Tax Network can play a central role. Therefore, the Women in Tax Network can play a strong advocacy role to champion the lobby for fiscal policy reforms that favor growth of women incomes and growth of women-owned businesses. But in addition, I think we must promote women in the policy positions. You've this morning we've all been talking about Dr. Ngonzi. Can you imagine the change that is out there in the future because of where she sits? A few years ago, we had a woman finance minister, and at that time I was in the Revenue Authority. It was my absolute pleasure to sit with her and talk about policy reforms and how we can actually gather more revenue and how we can increase the profits of the informal sector, largely made of women. And I think if you have more women in fiscal policy making decisions, I think there is every opportunity to see the footprint of the women increase on the continent. And when you do that, then we should see poverty reduction. Perhaps over a number of years, it may not be immediate, it won't be tomorrow, but we'll surely be on this path. And so that's my take. Let's get the women out there in policy making positions. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kajina, and for being here today with us, together with some of the other stalwarts that the Executive Secretary mentioned earlier that launched ATAF. I think that what you've said is really important, that we need to make a difference from a policy perspective, and we need to bring our voices and to ensure that we have a gendered lens when making policy. And also that each one of us, men and women, can play that role, and we need to make sure we do it deliberately. The Executive Secretary of ATAF needs no introduction. Executive Secretary, ATAF has been a voice in taxation on many areas over the last 11 years. Now, the establishment of an ATAF Women in Tax network. Please tell us, what is your vision for this and to officially launch the network? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasha, and thanks again to everyone. So far, it's been a great discussion and it's been very exciting. Over the years, there are two areas of taxation that, as we were building ATAF, we were never sure when is the right time because of the way public administration and even business go about doing its work on the continent. And that is bringing tax and gender and tax and the environment. But we feel after a decade of work in tax, the leaders that you've seen on this program today that built this organization, and the impact that we have made in the technical work that we've done through the continent, we feel strong enough to face whatever possible challenges we may find in bringing the topic both of tax and the environment and tax and gender to the fore. And so I've been very much encouraged by the presentations. There's nothing more to add. And especially also the many comments in the Q&A and in the chat box. Because I'm sure if we had 3 days, a lot of the people in the chat would have wanted to say something if we had the opportunity. And so we must take this momentum. We must build this network. And from ATAF's, we must build this network and we must span it across the various organizations and institutions that we come from. From ATAF's side, we will invest in this Women in Tax network. From outside, we will invest in research, in studies, in advocacy, but also in the monitoring of progress by countries and institutions. And so talking about the culture and the social issues impeding women's development, talking about the SDGs, talking about education, statistics, data, panels of experts have spoken about that extensively. The Women in Tax Network will provide a unique environment for women in the tax field in Africa to connect, to collaborate and develop and raise awareness of the interconnectivity of tax policy and gender equality. This network will represent and connect women in Africa working in taxation with the aim of furthering discussion on the effect of tax policy on gender equality and empowering women in tax. The network will be an association that will encourage the participation of women working in taxation in government, in the private sector, civil society, and in academia. In particular, this network will look at tax and gender from different perspectives, including, but not exclusively. It will look at the implicit bias in tax structures, differing experience of women in relation to tax officials, whether women and men react to compliance measures differently, and the role of women in tax administration and the informal economy. It will also work to improve the gender balance in leadership and management, as was just discussed today. This network activities will include research, evaluation parameter, mentorship, and we invite experienced women in this forum to make themselves available to play a role in the mentorship of other women. I think Alan Kajina explained the benefit of the partnership and mentorship she had from women leaders. Many of you are able to give back, and I hope through this forum, you will be able to participate in that. So this network that we are launching today will be governed by a council, a board of 10 members that will be made up of senior officials of institutions of ATAF member countries, and also will be made up of 3 members of ATAF member countries, both all from English, French, and Lusophone countries, a member of the academia, a member of civil society, and a member of the private sector. And this is how we will make this up. It will be an interim board that will run over the next 2 years. And in that time, we will build this network as an institution. We will build a program of activities. ATAF will put a budget to it. It will have a program that runs by itself. And let's see where we take this network into the future. We will incubate this network inside ATAF, and we will, from this network, see how it evolves either independently or as a division of ATAF in the future. All of those things will remain open. But over the next 2 years, we will develop the core instruments that will give this Women in Tax in Africa network the instruments, the leadership, the guidance, and the content it requires to have the impact that we were speaking about today. So in conclusion, I'm pleased to inform you that we have put together an interim board, like I said, an interim board, and I'm pleased to announce them here to you. The 3 members from the ATAF member countries who are part of the interim board is Madame Bamaze Denina Dama, who is in charge of the Directorate of Large Companies in the Togolese Tax Administration, the OTR. Dr. Amelia Mwendani, the President of the Tax Authority of Mozambique, and Ms. Veronique Hermini, who is the Head of Tax of Seychelles, that you have met on the program today. From civil society, Ms. Chenai Mukumba, who is from the Tax Justice Network Africa, will serve on the interim board. And from the private sector, Ms. Lazelle Terblanche, who is the founder of the African Industry Tax Association, an association of multinational enterprises operating across the continent. And from the ATAF Secretariat, Mrs. Vasha Singh, who's chairing this event, will be, for now, will be the coordinator of the activities of this Women in Tax network. We will, as soon as we have finalized it, announce from the academic side who will serve on this interim board. That is it. That is what we came here to do, to create the context, to create the momentum, and then to finally launch the network itself. It therefore, together with the chair, the vice chair, and the council of ATAF, and its co-founders on this platform, gives me great pleasure to officially launch the ATAF Women in Tax Network today. Through this network, we will continue our efforts to support Africa, to shape tax policy, tax administration, and overcome gender inequalities. I thank you.
Thank you, Executive Secretary, and thank you to all of you present here today and to my esteemed panel for your inputs and for your direction that you have given to us to take forward the ATAF Women in Tax Network. Africa's women is key to our future, and that's something that we have been speaking about today. And this is only a start. We will continue on this, as the Executive Secretary has mentioned, and we will share with you our website and the activities that we will be having. And we look forward to all of you to continue this dialogue and to continue your participation and bringing your voice to this very important topic. I would like to now hand over to Romeo, who will show you a short video that depicts the importance of this network. At the end of the video, we show some of the ambassadors that we have called on from our member administration. So if you don't see yourself there, it's because, and if you've given us your name, it's because we did not have it on time when we went to press with the video, and we will ask you that those that did not share to please share that with us. And over to you, Romeo.
Taxation and gender equality are two issues of strategic importance to developing countries and for Africa in particular. Indeed, evidence suggests that tax policies affect men and women differently, as the burden of taxes such as VAT falls disproportionately on women. In addition, in Africa, a high percentage of women work in the informal sector, and most market trade is carried out by women. A study of market traders in Uganda found that market fees are regressive and place a higher burden on women who trade in smaller items than men, who trade in larger items such as livestock.
Well, the impact of tax on different genders has not been fully examined, and in particular research on the African continent. And the potential and existing links between tax policy and gender equality have largely been ignored in development cooperation.
There is a need to increase the voice of women by mainstreaming gender in tax policy and by ensuring a larger representation of women in tax administrations. This trend is replicated throughout the public and private sectors. It is important, as we consider the implications of tax systems in Africa on gender equality, that the unique perspectives of female leaders are included and their voices heard.
La mobilisation des ressources nationales est un outil important de l'arsenal des pays en développement pour assurer un financement durable de leur stratégie de réduction de la pauvreté et de croissance. Dans la même direction, l'égalité des sexes est un objectif constant dans plusieurs programmes internationaux, y compris les objectifs de développement durable de l'ONU 2015, dans le cadre de l'agenda 2030 pour le développement durable et de l'agenda 2030 de l'Union africaine.
It is therefore essential to consider the impact of taxation on gender inequality.
To promote the UN Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063, ATAF is establishing a Women in Tax network that will empower women in leadership positions as well as address the gender equality in taxation from a tax policy and tax administration perspective.
The ATAF Women in Tax network will have three main objectives, namely, to provide a unique platform to African women in tax, to work to improve gender balance in tax-related organizations, and to look at the interactions between tax and gender, including how tax systems affect men and women differently and how tax policy can be a tool for improving gender equality. For more information on the ATAF Women in Tax Network, visit www.womenintax.org.
Merci à tous, mesdames et messieurs, chers participants. Merci, Madame Varsha Singh et aux panélistes de cette dernière session de la journée. Voilà, vous avez tout entendu sur le réseau. Vous savez quels sont les objectifs et quelles sont les perspectives d'avenir pour ce nouveau jalon dans l'évolution historique de la TAF. Pour conclure maintenant, je voudrais rendre la parole au président de la TAF pour dire quelques mots pour officiellement clôturer cette réunion. Après cela, je vous invite, mesdames et messieurs, à consulter vos adresses e-mail et le site web du réseau et de la TAF où vous pourrez accéder à la conclusion, au rapport de conclusion de cette réunion. Merci encore à tous et je vous souhaite une bonne fin de journée en écoutant le président, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Merci, j'espère que vous m'entendez bien. Merci, Roméo. Monsieur le vice-président de la TAF, Monsieur le secrétaire exécutif, Madame la présidente de l'autorité fiscale de Mozambique, Mesdames, Messieurs les membres, les panélistes des différentes sections, Mesdames, Messieurs les commissaires directeurs généraux des administrations fiscales, membres de la TAF, Madame, Messieurs, à vos titres, grades respectés, distingués invités, Mesdames et Messieurs. Nous voici arrivés à la fin de ce webinaire de lancement officiel du réseau des femmes du secteur de la fiscalité de la TAF. Avant de nous séparer, je tiens à remercier tous les participants pour leur assiduité au travail, la qualité de leur réflexion, la pertinence de leur contribution et pour avoir investi autant d'énergie, de temps, de passion pour le succès de cette activité. Les débats ont été riches.
Just to let you know that Morati and Bernie are waiting for the letter to be sent to the 15 countries, starting with the Anglophone countries while it's being...
Est-ce que je peux continuer? Je disais donc tantôt que les débats ont été riches, intenses et engagés comme nous y attendions. Les panélistes ont conduit avec professionnalisme le programme et les thèmes des différentes sessions. De même, la grande diversité des participants issus des secteurs publics et privés, de la société civile et des milieux universitaires a permis d'avoir des échanges francs et de haut niveau sur la question de l'égalité entre femmes et les hommes dans le domaine de la fiscalité. Pour l'heure, permettez-moi d'ajouter une nouvelle pierre à l'édifice en déclarant officiellement actif le réseau des femmes du secteur de la fiscalité de la TAF ce mardi 23 mars 2021. J'ai foi qu'en collaborant tous ensemble et en travaillant sans relâche, nous parviendrons à relever les défis que nous nous sommes fixés aujourd'hui. Je voudrais féliciter le secrétaire exécutif, le secrétariat exécutif, sous le leadership de M. Logan Wolf, pour le succès de plus dans le paramètre de l'ATAF. Permettez-moi de remercier les collègues commissaires généraux et directeurs généraux des administrations fiscales africaines pour leur appui indéfectible. Mes remerciements vont aussi aux partenaires en développement de l'ATAF, notamment la Banque africaine de développement sous son appui, à l'équipe technique qui a organisé cet événement, aux interprètes et à tous et à vous, mesdames et messieurs distingués invités, pour votre contribution à la réussite de cet important projet. Je déclare maintenant ce webinaire clos, tout en souhaitant plein succès à ce projet. Que l'Éternel bénisse les femmes africaines et surtout le réseau des femmes de l'ATAF. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et à très bientôt à tous. On ne rajoute pas de mots après le discours du Président. À bientôt.